What is up, everyone? This is an episode I've been looking forward to, in large part because it's doing this episode that will allow us to do some other episodes. So, Randall Carlson's name is in the title, and he is on the thumbnail, but no, I do not have Space Santa here with us today. If I did, if it was an interview, it would have said interview on it. There, you know, the little the nomenclature of the naming process for the King Pilled show. So we're gonna get into some. I don't know. To me, this stuff is almost it's almost mundane. Not in that it's boring, but in that it's very familiar. I've been following this stuff for long enough now that it's become embedded in the way that I view the world. But I also recognize that I'm not like everyone else, and there are a lot of people who've never encountered this. And some of the, I guess, the information that we'll be covering today, and then I think it's the only way for us to cover some of the other stuff that I want to talk about, the stuff that gets real off into schizo land. That is, you have to kind of have like a baseline understanding. So I want to make sure everybody who's watching regularly has a baseline understanding of some of this stuff. Because I think where this goes is, we've talked about, I talked at the end of the last episode I did with Charles Spadil, which you should definitely go back and listen to if you haven't yet. It was a phenomenal conversation. He's a very, very wise man. So at the end of it, I mentioned this idea that 2-Bit podcast, Jason and I have been talking about recently. It's something that we've kind of fleshed out in the voice chat of the King Pill Discord, which if you would like to join the best Discord server on the planet, then you can go to kingpill.com and do that. We've been talking about this idea of how, like, what is our role as, especially as Christian men who would see ourselves as broadly right-wing, probably would end up being categorized in something like the dissident right-wing or whatever the name is that is the name du jour right now. What is our fundamental responsibility? Are we revolutionaries? And we say, no, we're not revolutionaries. Are we reformers? No, we are not reformers. We happen to, from our social circles we come from, reformer is almost it has a connotation verging on, what would you say, derogatory? No, we're not reformers. What we are is we're redeemers. We're not trying to start another revolution. We don't need revolutions. We've had too many revolutions. We don't need more reformation. We have reformationed ourselves to this point. What we need is redemption. And I kind of kicked off a little firestorm in my Twitter mentions today by daring to weigh in publicly on the idea that, you know, the millennials and the Zoomers actually, like, it's okay to acknowledge that the world that we were born into has a lot about it that's really fucked up. That's just true. And it's fine to recognize that. It's fine to talk about that. It's fine to talk about the role that the boomers played in particular, that their generation, their time period, their epoch, the role that they've played in accelerating all of this destruction and the breakdown of all of our civil institutions. This stuff it's fine to talk about. It's fine to acknowledge that. That doesn't mean, oh, woe is me, we are victims. You know, I guess all we can do is just fuck off and die. No, I don't think that that's the case at all. In fact, I think this is not just a, well, let's try to look on the bright side thing. It's genuinely true that there's a tremendous amount of opportunity that is available to us. All of this is, think like a salesman. There's a reason salesmen can get a scummy reputation, like they're preying on vulnerable people. Well, that idea itself indicates the fact that when you're selling something, you have an opportunity to sell that thing. There's a void, there's a deficit, there's something missing. And if there's lots of things missing, then that means there's lots of opportunities. There's lots of places to offer something. And it just so happens that the more that you offer to other people, the more capital you accumulate yourself. Some of that capital is going to come in the form of money. Some of it may come in the form of land or businesses, or it will come in the form of family and relationships and communities, trust, all of these sorts of things. So we happen to believe here at the Real King Pill Show that we don't have a civilization anymore. We need to build one. Now, part of building is understanding what you're building on. And then I think what follows on from that is what you're building with. Our good friend of the show, Peter Thiel, likes to say that we basically stopped innovating in the world of atoms. Atoms is an ATOM, atom. We stopped innovating in the world of atoms sometime in the 70s, which happens to correspond with a whole bunch of charts that all seem to change in the 70s. Since then, all of our innovation has been in the world of bits. And I think part of this is because we have a flawed view of what the world of atoms actually is. I think we've very thoroughly dug up all of the toxicity that has pervaded all of our political and philosophical and religious institutions from liberalism. Liberalism, properly speaking, like the advance of, I guess liberalism would be kind of like the embodiment of the Luciferian revolutionary spirit. It's the thing you could find its tentacles in just about everything today. And a lot of people, I think, get bogged down and they get obsessed with the boogeyman. I've done this. I'm speaking from experience. I've sat here and stared at this boogeyman and obsessed about him. Gone over and over, around and round and round and round. He's probably not a him. He's probably a they. I've obsessed about them. But that in itself is actually part of the game. That's the getting you to resent the boogeyman and to act out of fear and resentment and hostility and anger. That's part of the game. The whole idea is we're going to present you a boogeyman, and we're going to rally support against the boogeyman and use that to corral society as it moves back and forth, pursuing our agendas. So kind of paradoxically, the way to break that cycle is to stop participating. But that's a negative message. And negative messages never land with people. People need something positive, something tangible. And I don't mean negative as in like sad, or positive as in happy. I mean negative as in like there's nothing there. You're taking something away. Whereas positive is there's something there. You're putting something on the table. So if we're going to redeem, and to redeem, we have to build. To get a civilization, we have to build. We have to redeem the errors of our forefathers. Well, then what are we building with? Let's go back to basics and figure out what is the structure of the world around us. Does it have a structure? If we assume, given all of our critiques on the philosophical, political, liberal, or religious side of liberalism, given the nature of our critiques there, what happens if we apply those to the world of science and mathematics and geometry and everything that's been given to us through liberal institutions? Well, let's see to what extent has liberalism pervaded those institutions as well. It obviously has. And so what would those institutions look like if that had never happened? So that's the goal through this process, because this is kind of, I kind of feel like I'm wandering through this journey in my head, and then periodically I'm going to check in with you guys and say, here's what I've found. Let's do something with this. I don't know exactly what to do with it, but here's something that I found. What do you guys think about it? I'll make a case for it, and then let's see where this will take us. Now, before we get into that real quick, shout out to, I saw him up here in the chat. Mitchell Chin is in the chat. Good buddy Mitchell Chin. I'm going to give him a shout out here because he is doing a fundraiser right now for a good friend of his. Mitch has been a friend of mine since college. We've known each other for, what is that, like 15 years or something now? And this is a good friend of his, Tyler. So very tragically, Tyler's dad died within the last several weeks. So I'm just going to read, there's a GoFundMe here for Tyler, his friend whose dad died. And I'm just going to read the description of here, and then I'll take the link. I'm going to drop it in the chat here, and then I'll post it in the description on the YouTube video. It says, "Hi everyone, my name is Mitch, and I'm here to share Tyler's story. Tyler is my business partner and best friend. The past few weeks have been extremely difficult for Tyler and his family. They lost their beloved father unexpectedly from a sudden cardiac event, and now they're facing overwhelming legal and funeral bills. Tyler's dad was the rock of the family. He was a brilliant, loving, caring, and generous man who always did whatever he could to help those in need. As a community, we can come together to support them in this time of need, just like Tyler's father did for others. Tyler's family needs help with legal fees as well as covering other costs while they go through this process. With your generous donations, we can ease some of the financial burden for Tyler and his family. Any amount is greatly appreciated and will go towards honoring their father's memory. From the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you for helping in any way possible. And then he put Isaiah 41:10, fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. So I'm going to drop this link. Any support you guys can provide is awesome. Very much appreciated. And again, this is a close friend of a close friend. And you can consider this the sponsor for today. That's one of them. The other one, another cause, is the St. Theodosius Orthodox Christian Cathedral. It's in Ohio. A good friend of ours in the King Pill Discord has been keeping us up to date on the status of this. They had a fire. On May 28th, St. Theodosius Orthodox Christian Cathedral was destroyed by a fire. This church is on the Registry of Historical Landmarks and must be restored to its original beauty and architecture. In order to do this, we must use artisans that know how to perform 113-year-old construction methods, which makes it very expensive to complete. Many people ask if we have insurance, and yes, we do, but we know it will cost much more than that. Please help us secure the funding to restore this beautiful treasure, our cathedral and historical landmark. This is a great shame this beautiful cathedral burned. You can see from the picture here, it wasn't completely burned, but there's a massive amount of restoration that's going to have to be done. Right now, what they're looking for, their current goal is $1 million. So anything that you guys can contribute to that as well is very much appreciated. Both of these people have asked me to use the platform here for something good for a change. So I'm going to give those guys a shout out. And I just dropped the links to both of them in the chat here. And again, I'll put it in the description on YouTube and on the podcast. If you're listening to this later on, you'll find it in there. Okay. So let me see what you guys are saying here in the chat. Duffhead says, whoops, just jumped away from me. Duffhead says, another episode I've been waiting for. Love me some Space Santa. That's right. Space Santa is one of my favorite people in the world, Randall Carlson, good old Space Santa. I first encountered him through Joe Rogan, probably, let me think here. It was when I was still living in Washington. So this would have been 7 years ago, probably. And I don't remember what happened first, if I encountered him and Graham Hancock on Rogan or if I read Graham Hancock's book. It was one of the two. And Graham Hancock's book just absolutely blew my mind. Very much recommended. It's called Fingerprints of the Gods. He wrote it in 1995. Now, he's a bit of a controversial character, and I think some of that is because of his presentation style. He's very he's got a deep romance to him, and he's an Englishman, and he's very demonstrative, and he speaks in very what would be the term here? Kind of like glamorous is coming to mind. That's not quite what I'm thinking of. He speaks in very flowery and ornate terms. He's, by his own admission, he's crafting a narrative. He's looking for the narrative that's there, and he happens to believe that there's something about reality that naturally produces beauty. So looking for a beautiful narrative, a narrative that's really compelling, is one way of pursuing the truth. And I agree with that. I like his approach. But so one of the basically his thesis is that there's a lost ancient civilization that was far more advanced than we give them credit for. And we're talking somewhere between 6, 10, 15,000 years ago, somewhere in that vicinity. There's overwhelming evidence that there were like vastly more sophisticated ancient cultures of some type than we realize, than anything about the current literature says. There's overwhelming evidence for this to be the case. It's very, very clear. Some of this is stuff that I want to share with you guys as we go down this little journey. But so he was making this case back in the 90s, and he said it seems like there was some kind of a massive cataclysm of some sort. There was some sort of catastrophe that just eliminated this ancient culture. So we've got their fingerprints all over the place, but we don't. and the way he did this was largely by marrying archaeological and what would be the word for cartological, dealing with maps, and taking these things and comparing them to mythology, to the ancient mythologies that basically every civilization around the world has. We all have these mythologies, and these are from vastly different parts of the world. You put them together and you start comparing notes, and it becomes very clear that there's major commonalities, almost as if they're all kind of telling different perspectives of the same story. Now, of course, from a Christian perspective, the idea, there was like an advanced civilization that got wiped out by a massive catastrophe, and then everyone had to start over from scratch. I wonder where I've heard that story before. So it's not really a surprise per se, but the nature of it is what's very interesting. What was the nature of this advanced civilization? Now, coming from a Christian perspective, knowing the story, we would naturally be led to assume that whatever the nature of this civilization was, led to their destruction. It was overwhelmingly evil. So why was that? How did they get to that point? What led them to that point? How can we understand that better through studying what is likely their remnants? This is just the basic process of history just being applied to a previously unknown group of people. Now we can see there's strong evidence that these two stories go together. So let's see how we can better understand the biblical record by surveying what's out there in the historical record. What sort of story does this write for us to follow? So that's to start off with. That's Graham Hancock's thesis, and then Randall Carlson is a guy he encountered who is just a lovely old man, just a lovely old geologist, one of the most brilliant guys you'll ever encounter, and just has such a kind, beautiful spirit. He's just the best of us. He is what a scientist ought to be. He's the guy who wants to actually do science. Every time he gets into a contentious debate with someone or a conversation where a debate is happening on the Joe Rogan Experience, he's always like, guys, can we get back to talking about the rocks again? Because I've got some really cool rocks. I love it about him. So I don't remember who it was, but somebody termed him Space Santa, and I was like, that's perfect. That's exactly his demeanor. Jason Stapleton, who I used to co-host his show, he said, when I have my hair down, I look a lot more like Randall because he's got the big beard and long kind of curly hair. And he told Amy, he's like, Amy, I don't know if you realized it, but you married young Randall Carlson. Like Matt's going to look like Randall Carlson someday. And the resemblance was kind of startling. There's no way that I'm ever going to have the level of knowledge and insight. And he's got a brain for this stuff that I can consume it from him, but I wouldn't even know where to start to come up with it all. So Glonk Respector says he doesn't know who this guy is, but the boys haven't let him down yet. I am going to make your life better today by introducing you to Randall Carlson. Okay. Tower of Babel. Yes, Tower of Babel. Okay, just looking at seeing what you guys are talking about. All right. So let's get going with what I'm going to do today is share this video. And it's a video of one of his lectures that this channel called After School put together, where they do like the drawing of what he's talking about. Just kind of got some cool visual effects with it, but it's like one of the best distillations of some of the most important concepts that are going to become repeating patterns that will follow along later on. So I'm going to play. Got to make sure I pick the right one here. Okay. So I'm just going to play this, and as we go along, I'll stop and comment on some things. And I will say that Randall is not a Christian. He's not coming at this from a Christian perspective. He's not coming at it from a hostile to Christian perspective. He actually has great respect for what he sees as the Christian tradition. And for me, actually becoming Orthodox and beginning to see the world through the eyes of an Orthodox Christian has just made all of this stuff crystallize, to use a word we'll encounter later, has made all this stuff crystallize a lot more for me. And I think it, as profound as it is to guys like Randall, who see this as like, we're looking at these patterns in the universe that reveal to us the handiwork of the Creator, and this is this great, awesome, profound thing. when you take that frame of view from the perspective of an Orthodox Christian, it's even more profound. There's deep, deep profundity to all of this. But it's going to take time to try to pull it all out. And as it is, I'm going to sound kind of insane with some of the stuff that I'm saying. So I want to try to bring people along as much as possible, so I don't sound too insane. So I got this on 1.5x. I listen to everything on 2x, and this is a 2-hour video as it is. I don't know if we'll be able to make it through the whole thing. But so sorry for those of you who like to listen fast. Hopefully you can still keep up if you're listening on the audio later. If not, just knock it down a little bit. Hopefully he's going to be the one doing the most of the talking and not me. So, all right, let's get it started.
Hello, I'm Randall Carlson, and I would like to welcome you to a special episode of After School. I'm a designer and builder by profession, but have for many years been an avid investigator into the marvels and mysteries of this amazing world we inhabit. I would like to invite you to join us here on a journey into the realm of sacred number and symbol, and the forms, patterns, and cycles of both space and time in which these numbers are embedded. Today, thanks to the talented team at After School, we'll take a peek behind the veil into the ancient symbolism of sacred number that still exists as part of our everyday lives. The animation format employed here is a powerful medium for conveying the essence of this knowledge. And so, without further ado, let us begin.
So what is the universal language? It's symbolism. It's number and symbolism and form. And number, symbolism, and form are universal regardless of the spoken tongue, which one happens to have been brought up in. And hopefully in the next hour and a half, I'm going to be showing you examples of this so that you can see for yourself what actually the universal language of geometry and symbolism actually means. So we're going to jump right into it here and talk about sacred numbers embedded in everyday phenomena. These are the things that we all pretty much think about and use on a daily basis without ever really pondering the fact that there's actually deep symbolism hidden within them. We measure our life in terms of days, of 24 hours, referred to as a tropical or solar day. And it turns out that 24 of these hours are 1,440 minutes. This is one of the key numbers within the ancient canon of numerical cosmology that the ancients used to basically design and create their world. The 1,440 minutes equates to 86,400 seconds. So if you just listen to these numbers, look at them, and let them kind of soak into your brain, once you've gotten into this as actually a system, a methodology of transmitting information, these numbers are actually carriers of information because each number stands for meanings beyond just the apparent ones. So we see 1,440 minutes is equal to 86,400 seconds, and a 12-hour span of time, which is usually represented on the clock, 720 minutes, which equals 43,200 seconds.
I'll just say real quick what he mentioned there, that that these viewing numbers as symbols that carry meaning. This is not a revolutionary concept. That's literally what numbers are. Numbers are symbols that carry meaning. So the question really is, what kind of meaning do they carry? And are they capable of carrying multiple meanings? Or even single meanings that manifest themselves at different levels of complexity or scale? And obviously the point is, yes, they can.
So just look at those numbers. You'll think that obviously 43,200 is half of 86,400. The 1,440, we're going to counter that number again here momentarily. So these are just examples of some of the time measures, how we think about time in our particular culture. Space measure, we talk about a foot. We talk about of 12 inches. We talk about a square foot. And you'll notice that the square foot has the same repetition of digits, 144, as the 24 hours does. All we do is we tack a 0 on that. We have the number of minutes in a day. We have a cubic foot equaling 1728. I'm going to call your attention to the 1 square yard, which is 1,296 inches. As it turns out, we can stick a 0 on the end of that, and we have 12,960 years, which turns out to be an awesomely important span of time in terms of some of the great cycles that affect this planet, and that's what we're going to be getting to. Geometry, everybody knows that a circumference of a circle is divided into 360 degrees, and that 360 degrees of arc, because each degree is subdivided into minutes of arc, there is then 60 times 360, as it says there, 21,600. And then you'll notice that 21,600 minutes of arc equals 1,296,000 seconds of arc. That's a mighty fine subdivision of a circle that would be used mostly by astronomers to measure the motion of distant stars. But notice that number, 1,296,000, and you'll see that it's the same number, just raised by 3 orders of magnitude as the number of square inches in a square yard. Okay, now another thing you might notice about most of these numbers from 1440 to 8640, 43,200, 144, 1728, 36, 1296 is that they all Cabalistically add up and reduce to the single digit 9. Notice that all of them. Pick any one of them, other than, say, with the exception of 24, but 4.
Okay, real quick, I want to respond to some of the comments here. So Natashki said, so we think he's smart if he's incapable of coming to the conclusion that Jesus is the way. Yes, of course. There's lots of people who are smart who are not Christians. Being a Christian is not a predicate to being smart. There's lots of things that you learn from lots of different people who aren't Christians, like learning how to, I don't know, rebuild the motor in a car, or how to, I don't know, how to mix paints, or how to sing. All these different things. You don't have to learn the facts. You don't have to learn the information itself from a Christian for it to be true information. So this is true information that he's giving. The meaning of the information, that's a different question. What does it mean? Now, he's going to provide what he thinks it means, and I happen to think in a lot of these cases, what he thinks it means is directionally accurate, but it's not accurate. And the thing is, these guys who approach science this way, who are looking at the relationships between geometry and numbers and mathematics and astronomy, these guys who are doing this are much closer to the truth than normal, ordinary, liberal, materialist scientific scholars. So, like, as you listen to him, obviously, if you're coming from the perspective of a Christian, when he says stuff that sounds not Christian, well, yeah, like, filter it through that lens. But it doesn't, just the fact that he comes to non-Christian conclusions or conclusions that don't perfectly square with Christianity, this isn't what Christianity is. Christianity isn't about having all the correct opinions on all the correct things. It's about a spirit. It's about embodying the spirit of Christ. So as Jason from 2-Bit Podcast likes to say, you can be wrong and true, or you can be right and false. These things are these are independent variables from each other. So the stuff that he's getting into here, he's presenting facts. He's presenting things here for just like putting them on the table, and then what we choose to do with them is up to us. I'll go back just a little bit here to get the start of this little section he's talking about.
1444. Okay, now another thing you might notice about most of these numbers from 1440 to 8640, 43,200, 144, 1728, 36, 1296 is that they all Kabbalistically add up and reduce to the single digit 9. Notice that, all of them. Pick any one of them, other than, say, with the exception of 24, but 1440 adds and reduces to a single digit 9. 1296, you'll notice the same thing. 1 and 2 and 9 and 6 is 18, which adds to a 9. Okay, so if you're taking notes, write these down or make mental notes of these numbers, because these are the numbers we're going to be encountering now as we progress through this journey here into the hidden mathematics. So we will start by looking at how some of these same numbers and other numbers are associated with the measures of geometry. And here we have what I refer to as the alphabet of sacred geometry, and these are the simplest forms. These are the polygons. You have a circle, which is actually not a polygon, but we have an equilateral triangle, a square, and a pentagon. And each of these can be measured by the number of degrees that determine the angles of the sides. So, for example, we look at a circle, which is just a special case of an ellipse with eccentricity of 0. We've covered this already, so let's go right to the equilateral triangle, and we'll see it's 60, 60, and 60, which equals 180 degrees. Again, notice that we've got the number 9 recurring. We go to the square, which is 4 times 90 degrees. The total number of degrees defining the square is 360, the same as the circle, the same as the measure of a circle. And we measure the polygons by essentially measuring the angles of the vertices or the corners. So then likewise with the pentagon, each of the angles between successive edges is 108 degrees. So you multiply the 108 times 5 and you get 540.
Okay, so real quick, just to for any of the slow boys that aren't necessarily keeping up with exactly what he's doing, he's going through each of these major geometric shapes and describing how they're drawn. How do we arrive at this shape? So if you have a polygon with 5 equal sides, that polygon is going to take this shape, and it's going to have 108 degree angles on all of these. And then you add up all of those angles, that gives you a number, which is going to be the total of all those angles. And each of these numbers, when you do this math with them, you get a number like this, like 540, and then you do what's called taking the digital root of it, which is 5 plus 4 equals 9. So you just add up whatever the numbers are in the number. So this one is, again, the digital root of 108 is 9. This is just a way of categorizing numbers. And it just so happens that there's patterns in these things. We can have a conversation after we understand the patterns, then we can have a conversation about what the patterns mean. Do they mean anything? I would contend they do. I think it's silly to say if there's patterns this precise and repeating with they have implications like they do, then they obviously don't mean nothing. The question is, what do they mean? Yes, he did mention the Kabbalah, just because this is a technique that the Kabbalah uses, this digital root, taking the digital root of something. It's just a technique that they use. So this is the sort of thing that the Kabbalists get into. This is the sort of thing that they talk about and use. But studying that doesn't make you a Kabbalist. If you worship it, if you turn it into your all-consuming passion, and you treat it as a god, giving it all of your worship and veneration, yes, that would make you a Kabbalist. But studying something like this isn't any more or less scientific than, like Natashki said, well, this isn't talking about changing the oil in your car. Yes, it is. This is the instructions of how to construct these patterns. And you can use this technique that these other people happen to use. Hey, look at him. He's here. How dead are you, Cooper?
On a scale of 1 to dead, I'd be like 24.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you could be worse, but you could be better.
Yeah. I'm like if you were like if you put like a cyanide capsule in your mouth, or like arsenic or something, I'm like close to that.
Okay. That's pretty good.
Yeah, my wife just woke me up because I fucking passed out. I've been zonked out for the past I don't know, 4 hours or something.
Mm-hmm.
I saw your text message. Hello, everybody.
All right.
I have a tub of ice cream that I'm going to eat now, but please continue. I don't know what we're talking about.
It's Space Santa shit.
Oh, cool. I was listening to him before I passed out.
Nice. You had good dreams then.
I didn't have any dreams.
All right, here we go.
Okay.
Again, notice everything adds up to 9 for some strange reason. 108 is going to turn out to be a very important number. It's a lunar number, as you're going to see. 108. Anybody know what metal has an atomic weight of silver? Atomic weight of 108? Yes, that's right. It's silver. Very good. All right, so let's get into some of the solids. Tetrahedron is this form right here, and it's composed of 4 of the equilateral triangles. So we have, as it says here, there's 4 triangular faces. 4 times 180 is 720 degrees. That is the total angular measure of this particular geometric form. This is known as one of the Platonic solids, or regular polyhedra. Polyhedra means multiple faces, and the regular polyhedra is the family of 5. There's only 5 that have the same shape or the same polygonal face. In this case, the equilateral triangle. And then we will move on to the cube, and the cube is 6 faces, and they're each square, and we saw that each of those square faces had 360 degrees, 6 times 360. The important thing is to grasp that the total number of degrees in this form is 2,160. 2,160. We're going to find out that number actually turns out to be pretty significant in the measure of other parts of time and space. Then we'll go to the octahedron, and it has 8 triangular faces. This is our octahedron right here. And they're all, you'll notice that so far the tetrahedron and the octahedron are both composed of equilateral triangular faces. And essentially, if you look at the difference between the tetrahedron and the octahedron,
that's a
D8.
D8.
Just imagine it if we could take the tetrahedron and split it along an edge. And
That's what?
That's a D8.
A D8?
Yeah. Like my longsword. You roll a D8 for your damage.
Oh yeah. Yeah, oh that's the stuff the cool guys do, right?
Right.
Yeah.
insert a 4th triangular face, it would cause it to flatten out somewhat, and it would give us the top half of the octahedron. And likewise, we could insert a 5th equilateral triangle in here. It's going to give us the icosahedron, which I'll show you in a minute. If we tried to insert a 6th one, though, we discovered that the whole thing flattened out into 2 dimensions. So that wouldn't work as far as enclosing space. So in any case, notice we're seeing a recurrence of this number that we saw, 1440. Remember we saw that number back right here, the number of minutes in a day. So let that relationship sink in. The number of minutes in the time that it takes our Earth to spin exactly once on its axis relative to the sun happens to be the same number of degrees that define the octahedron. And that's actually what we're talking about there when we're talking about a tropical or solar day. We're talking about exactly one rotation of the Earth on its axis relative to the sun. Okay. Then we have the icosahedron, which is 20 faces, all equilateral triangles. You can see if you look at the vertex of this thing, you'll see that there are 5 faces clustered around each vertex.
A D20.
So if we were to split an edge, insert another triangle, what would happen is it would flatten out into a hexagon, a flat hexagon. with 6 equilateral triangles about its center. In any case, there are 20 of these triangular faces. 20 times 180 is 3,600. So again, we have one of our 9s, and then our final.
Yeah, right. Roll for initiative.
My favorite shape. This is what Plato referred to the dodecahedron as being the shape of the universe itself. The dodecahedron, you'll notice, has 12 faces, 20 vertices, whereas the icosahedron has 20 faces and 12 vertices. So they're duals of each other. We could actually suspend this icosahedron. If the dodecahedron was hollow, we could put it inside. We would discover that each corner of the icosahedron coincided with the center of the pentagonal face of the dodecahedron. Okay, each pentagonal face, as we found out, each edge was 108. 5 times 108 is 540. 12 times 540, as it says, is 6,480. So again, we've got the number 9 redundantly occurring over and over again in these measures.
Hey, Matt.
Okay, 6,000.
Yeah.
What's everyone freaking out about?
This is so this is precisely the sentiment that I'm looking to combat by getting people looking at this stuff. Because just the same way we talked about yesterday with Charles Padil about how the enemies, the people that we resent, whoever your resentment target is, those people stepped in and populated a space because good men were not populating it already. So the society was subverted not because the good men were standing there fighting and they just got outmatched. They got subverted and pulled away, and they vacated these spaces and ensured that these spaces, the spaces of insert aspect of society that has been subverted that you're mad about, insert whatever it is. The reason it was subverted was because people were pulled away from it and said, no, don't look at it. Ignore this. Focus on these other things. Don't focus on this thing at all. Leave it to us. We'll take care of that. Studying this sort of thing is what scientists have done for thousands of years. This is basic geometry. The relationship, this is math and geometry. And people are, from it. And I think a lot of this like knee-jerk response to it is actually because people hate math. And so someone could not possibly if someone's presenting math in a compelling way, there must be something demonic about it.
Is that what everyone's freaking out about? That like, what, Randall Carlson?
Randall Carlson's a Freemason, so he worships Lucifer.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Yeah. Like,
okay, but let's just grant that premise that like,
yeah.
Okay, you could make the argument, I think, you could make an argument that at the end of the day, he is, worship, like, is he worshiping Lucifer? Like, okay, maybe somewhere they're, like, killing goats and, like, drinking them and burning them on an altar to, like, Lucifer or something like that. I doubt he's doing that, but even granting the premise that he's actually, like, participating in worship, and, like, worship properly understood, is it true or not true what he's saying?
Right.
Right?
Right. I mean, what would be... I can't even think of an analogy for it.
Okay,
like
Natashki, if you're just going to spur, get out of here. You can come back when you've relaxed.
If you're gonna say that we can't learn factual information about the universe, that we can only learn factual information about the universe from a true, proper Christian, that's going to get you into a whole bunch of trouble starting to define who a true, proper Christian is.
Did you know that the Bible's full of Babylonian astrology?
Yes. The Bible's full of it.
And it's
prophets spoke in those terms. They used those terms specifically.
So
the fact that he's not an Orthodox Christian and talking about this is precisely why I feel compelled to talk about it. Because I want him to become an Orthodox Christian. I think if he was to see the world through an Orthodox Christian's eyes, it would make the stuff that he's looking at all that more profound to him. Because he understands correctly that there is divinity present in this. God has a fingerprint that he has put on creation. And studying that fingerprint is not wrong. But there's no Christians who are doing it. That's the problem. The Christians aren't studying the fingerprints of God in creation and figuring out what that means for us and how we can experience that and how we can use that understanding to make our lives better.
It just kind of annoys me when people start pearl clutching. You know?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay, like if Matt and I
Like-
were like, you guys are gonna watch us do a live stream where we're gonna get a Ouija board out and we're gonna try to like summon a spirit and ask it its name and like
I wouldn't do
divine-
that.
Yeah. Like if we ever do that, I would ask that just stop listening. Tune us out. We're done.
Uh-huh. Like
Give us-
Duffhead said, nobody gives a fuck either way. Cool shit is cool shit. Yeah, right.
Yeah, right. Like that's a dodecahedron. That's cool.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Did you know that you could fit an icosahedron inside of a dodecahedron, and each of the points on the icosahedron are gonna touch at the exact center point of the pentagons on the dodecahedron? That's freaking cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's continue. Because we haven't even got started.
Right.
480 turns out to be a critically important number as well, as you're going to see as we proceed along here. Oh, and then we have the star tetrahedron, which would be two tetrahedrons interlaced, and I don't have one of those today, but if you can picture a tetrahedron like this, and then one like this interlaced, it gives you this, what's known as sometimes the star tetrahedron, or the stellated octahedron. It is composed of two tetrahedrons, each of 720. So here again, now you're seeing the repetition of the same number, 1440, being the measure of the star tetrahedron. Okay, so now we're going to talk about time measures. The first thing we're going to look at is astrological time cycles. I don't know how many of you have studied astrology, but in this particular scheme of time, the total duration of the processional cycle, which is 25,920 years, this is the motion of the Earth on its axis like this, or you could think of it like this. The axis of the Earth actually forms sort of an hourglass motion, a long, slow period of rotation. It's you could consider Earth's third motion, next to its first motion, which is the daily rotation of the Earth on its axis, its second motion, which is the orbit of the Earth around the Sun, and its third motion, which is the precession of the Earth's axis. The diurnal or daily rotation of the Earth on its axis gives us the day-night cycle, which is obviously of critical importance to our life down here on Earth. The orbit around the Sun.
Now, I know that there are I know you guys are out there. I know our flurfs are out there. Just so you know, Cooper, flurf is a derogatory term for flat earther.
Is it?
Yeah. I just wanted to make sure I got actually the full word in there for the sake of the YouTubes. They can give us our little warning banner on it.
Yeah, Colin, here
yep.
they come.
Yeah, that's right. So one of the reasons why I would love to get Austin Whitsitt and Randall Carlson into a room and have them talk. Like, just you guys, I'm not smart enough to even know how to start a conversation about it. But I know you guys both are. So you guys start talking to each other, and I want to see what comes out of that. What do you guys wind up settling on? Because this is something that I haven't seen. And if anybody out there they've seen something that relates the precession of the equinoxes and the relationship of all the ancient astrological calendars and everything, if they've seen a way to mash that up with the idea of like the vortex-shaped Earth with the flat plane in the middle, if anybody has seen anything where that connects those, I would love to see it. I haven't been able to find it anywhere. I want these different communities to talk to each other and come up with with some kind of explanation. Because I think that they go together really well. I'm just not smart enough to actually figure it out myself.
One of the things that really irritates me, and this is, I think, part of growing up as I'm sure you can relate to this being Adventist, but growing up like in the charismatic movement, Pentecostal and everything, there is this sort of, and I think this is the case in a lot of Protestant circles, maybe not so much in the Reformed circles because they're a little more like, maybe too much like rational.
Mm-hmm.
But there's this tendency to like everything's demons.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, you watched a documentary and there was like an African tribe doing like a dance or something. There's gonna be a demon jumping out of your TV and like crawling into your bed with you, right. Or like, you read Harry Potter. Oh no, demons. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. It's almost like overcorrecting from their demons aren't in anything to demons are in everything.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, you're just like, you end up spending more time thinking about demons.
Yeah,
than
right.
anything else.
Yeah, and you start looking for them.
Yeah,
so you start finding
them. Demons. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I was It's like
You're going
somehow
looking for spooks. Chill out.
yeah, right. Like Harry Potter was bad, but Lord of the Rings was good, and it was like, well, I mean, literally, yeah, but like on a moral plane,
I've heard Lord of the Rings was demonic.
Oh wow, okay, yeah. I mean, I don't think I ever got that, but
I've heard Narnia was demonic.
yeah. This it's someone brought up Jonathan Pajot, and like this is exactly the sort of stuff that Jonathan Pajot talks about.
So Jonathan Pajot is demonic. He
Right.
He worships Satan. He's probably a Freemason.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Got to keep this. We do have to pause this every so once in a while and talk about it, so it's not just us playing somebody else's video. But we're gonna keep trying to get through this.
And also is likewise of critical importance because that's the yearly cycle. The third motion is what the ancients referred to as the great year. And it's been measured by astronomers at slightly over 50 seconds of arc of motion per year, which actually puts the astronomically determined number slightly less than this one. But we don't know that that's necessarily constant for the whole cycle. In any case, the ancient number that was typically attributed to this great year cycle was 25,920 years. That great year was considered to be analogous to our
What exactly
is
your problem?
This is the annual...
What's your issue? What's your issue? Like shapes and shit? Is that your problem? Or is it just that he's a Freemason? So you're just like everything he says is going to be demons for you.
Yeah,
if that's the case, this isn't the stream for you. And if you're going to be annoying, I'll mute you for the rest of the stream.
I've been New Age while still being new. Okay, yeah. We're just not going to agree on this, Natoshki, and that's fine.
Year was divided into 4 seasons of spring, summer, winter, and fall. Likewise, the great year was divided into 4 great seasons, symbolized by the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac: the bull, the lion, the eagle, and the man or the angel. If you divide 25,920 by 4 to determine the duration of each season, you'll discover that it's 6,480 years, which is interesting because 6,480 years, as you recall, was the total measure of the dodecahedron. So here we have this same number linking the measure of space in terms of the dodecahedron, 6,480 degrees, and the season of the great year, which was considered to be profoundly important to ancient cultures all over the world, who had various ways of representing this 4-fold division of cyclical time. All right, then we have, from the ancient Chaldeans, we have what was known as the Saros cycle, which was 3,600 years. So we see a repetition of that number. The 3,600, if you recalling and are taking notes, is the number of degrees measuring the icosahedron. Then we have the decans. You'll notice that a Platonic month, which is 1/12 of the great year, right there. You divide that number by 12, you get this number, 2,160. And that number, you may recall, depending on how good your memory is the number of degrees measuring the cube, 2,160. And then you'll notice the 2 decans of the ecliptic, or 20 degrees of the ecliptic, is 1,440, the number of degrees in the octahedron. And 1 decan, or 10 degrees, and for any of you who've studied astrology, you know that the decans are important to astrological determinations. 1 decan of 10 degrees then takes 720 years. And so here we have all 5 of the Platonic solids represented in these particular time cycles. And over here, I'm going to mention that ancient cultures all over the world used to run 2 calendars successively: a secular calendar, which is typically like our modern calendar of 365 1/4 days, and then they would have a sacred calendar of 360 days, and in 5 days intercalated, they would call it. And typically, they would do, whether it was the Greeks or the Egyptians or even the Mayans, ancient cultures all over the world had similar traditions of setting those 5 days aside, and they were considered to be unlucky. And so, no work, no activity, nothing. Nobody ever tried to do anything on those days. They would just take those days off. 5 days off, and then they would resume again and pick up their sacred year of 360 degrees. Now, the Sumerians had a belief that the year was once actually 360 days in length, and that somewhere along, as a result of some cosmic catastrophe of some undefined sort, the year was lengthened by 5 1/4 days. And so, the Sumerians, who are the first
when we were talking about this morning,
interesting.
I was trying to remember that, and I couldn't remember that detail, so I didn't.
I was actually going to suggest that, and I forgot to. Maybe that's what happened.
Yeah, something. It kind of reminds me of one of the theories about the Earth that I heard before. It's a great schizo theory. It was the expanding Earth hypothesis, that the Earth was once. So we see all the continental drift, and all the continents are apart from each other. And so we theorize, they were once, all conglomerated together on one part of the Earth, and everything else was water. No, actually, what it was is the Earth was a smaller sphere. So the land was all connected, and then there was some water, and then the Earth is expanding and getting bigger and bigger. So if the Earth was expanding, I don't even know how this works now. If the Earth expands, would that make the calendar shorter? See, this is why I need other people to think about this other than me, because I get these questions and I have no idea how to answer them. I'm too dumb.
What I wonder is like, is there at any point like, okay, not assuming not a leap year, do we ever experience like a quarter of a day? How does that fit in? Is it just like a couple of minutes over the course of a year that add up every day, or how does that work?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think the leap year makes up for that quarter day because
Right, I know,
every
but
4 years.
for the other 3 years, where is that quarter happening? It's like on the last day of the year, we just have like an extra long day or something, and
Well, I think
everyone ignores that on the clock.
I think it would be. I think it would. It's like a cumulative thing. So it would be distributed. I don't know. That's a good question. See, we're retarded. You know, we're number.
Where's the quarter day for 3 years that I experienced?
Yeah, right.
I think you're making this up.
They're robbing me in my sleep.
Own culture to mathematically divide the circle into 360 degrees. It is believed that one of their motives for doing so was they believed that circle then could become a model of the year, and each degree then representing one day. So what we have now is a synchrony going on, in that if the year, the idealized or sacred year, is 360 days, then what we have, if you actually picture it, is that the Earth is describing a circle in its orbit, but then in each degree of motion around that circle, it's turned once on its axis. So what we have there is a synchronization of this cosmic motion representing these numbers. So in any case, the ancient cultures would reckon time measure by 360 days according to the sacred calendar. And by doing so, they could then divide that 360 days of the sacred year into subdivisions such as this right over here. And we'll just run through that very quickly. You'll notice that one decade turns out to be 10 days within the sacred calendar, and that's exactly 14,400 minutes. So here we have the same numbers recurring again. You'll notice, though, that the symbolism of the number is not lost, or the system of the symbolism of the number is consistent irrespective of its order of magnitude. So in other words, you could say the square of 12 being 144 has the same symbolism as 144 times 10, or 144 times 100, as you have right here, or even 144 times 1,000. Again, referring back to the book of Revelations, there's a verse in there referring to the 144,000 redeemed of the earth. And we'll get to that here shortly. That's an interesting quote, because they have various ways of embedding these sacred numbers into the various traditions. You'll notice that 3 decans, or one Platonic month, in the Platonic year was 2,160 years, but in the sacred year of 360 days, again, there's that 43,200. So, and go down here, the one Platonic season of 6,480 years, 129,600. So if you're taking notes and writing these down, you're going to find it, you're writing down the same numbers over and over again, simply raised to different orders of magnitude.
How many sides are on? And
this is just a little graphic.
The icosahedron was 11 sides. Is that what it was? Icosahedron. It has 20 faces. Yeah, 20 faces. Icosahedron has 20 faces, and then the dodecahedron. See, I don't know my Greek enough. Dodecahedron has 24 faces.
See.
Yeah, dodeca, so 212. Yeah.
Duh.
I was gonna say something. I was kind of thinking about this whole thing we've been spatting about with the chat, or at least with Natashki, that you've got even using numbers itself is like you're using these numbers that symbolize all these different things. You just don't know that they symbolize these other things. And to say that only these guys should be the ones who think and are aware of this and talk about it and muse on it and everything is to say that those other properties of the numbers belong to just these guys. But those other properties of the numbers are themselves part of creation. And there's no human sect that has a priority claim to aspects of creation, to the knowledge in them. So we have to, this is part of our colonial Christian heritage, is that we're going to build our temple on top of the pagan shrine. Because that's exactly what they did. $1 super chat from Randy West. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. I also love the idea of 13 months of 28 days. I don't know what it would take to actually get a change in the calendar like that. I can't even fathom.
The Gregorian calendar had 13 months. Aren't we on the Gregorian calendar?
She said Georgian.
Oh, Georgian? Oh, I see. What was the one that you were telling me about earlier? It was like the was it the Sumerians or whatever that had their months? We're not on the Julian. And then there was they had like 4 or 5 days or whatever.
That was the thing he was just talking about.
Oh, okay, I see. The 4 or 5 days that were just like the unlucky days where everyone hid in their houses.
Yeah.
That'd be kind of cool, man, if we could bring that back.
Yeah. Well, I think probably what that is that would be kind of like the holidays. That would be the maybe the ancestral version of holidays. They just took their 5.25 days of holiday once at the end of the year before starting the next year. And then they just worked because they just slaved for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week otherwise. With their grinding up flour and dragging rocks and stuff around.
Orders of magnitude.
It would just be cool if there was like a 5-day period once a year where everything was shut down and it'd be like the Truman Show, where like they could like turn down the lights and it'd be all dark and fill everything with fog and it'd be spooky. Whoever they are, just like fill the earth with fog and make it all spooky. And
the stage masters,
and you have to like go out and like slay a deer or something like that with a brick to survive for the week.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It would be like
have fun.
It'd be like mix it with the idea of the purge and have like a Hunger Games kind of thing.
Yeah,
This is the means of population control.
Yeah. Kind of
the weak will not survive.
Yeah, we could do that.
It'd be called Deer Brick.
This is just a little graphic that depicts this processional motion that I'm talking about here. This motion right here, that is generally assumed by most astronomers to be primarily induced onto the Earth by the moon, secondarily by the sun, and then also a contributing factor by the planets. So it's almost, you could almost think of this processional motion of the Earth's axis as being the vectoral summation of all the gravity forces of the solar system acting on the Earth, causing it acting. See, when the planet rotates on its axis, and this is a critical factor, as it rotates on its axis, it spreads out towards the middle. Its equatorial diameter is greater than its polar diameter. And that, in fact, is critical to the Earth maintaining axial stability, so that it's not doing this in its orbit around the sun. Because if it was doing that, it's likely that higher life would have never evolved in the first place. But due to the fact that it spins, it spreads out so that the diameter of the equator is 26 miles greater than the diameter of the pole. The sum total of all the gravity forces impinging upon the Earth from moon, sun, and planets acts upon that bulge as if it was a flywheel and is actually pulling it around. And it's that leads to the great year. And what it does is, over a period of half the great year, 12,960 years, is it reverses the seasons. So that if we were able to jump in a time machine and go back 12,960 or ahead 12,960, we would find that everything was reversed. If we would keep the same Gregorian calendar in place, the seasons would have been reversed, so that winter would be July and summer would be... In fact, and then what we would see is that hemispherically, like we know that when it's winter in the northern hemisphere, it's summer in the southern hemisphere. Well, those seasons would be reversed. They flip. It's a back and forth. It's an oscillation between the two hemispheres of the Earth over a period of 12,960 years. This shows the wheel of the great year with all of the ages, the astrological months as they're known. And if we were to place ourselves right at this position right here where it says 0 years BP, BP means before present, and it also is 25,920 years. So what has been happening is that the vernal equinox, a hypothetical point in space occupied by the sun, when day and night are the exact same duration, that vernal point is moving through space as a result of this axial motion of the Earth. And ancient peoples would go to great lengths to try to observe and predict that motion. So they would set up structures, oftentimes on a very large scale, that would be oriented to certain points in space, so that one could, from certain vantage points, such as the center of a ringed megalithic structure, for example, or the center of a temple that had an axial orientation to a certain point on the horizon, one could make minute observations of this slowly shifting vernal equinox, or, for example, the solstices. The vernal equinox and the solstices are two lines in space that are at right angles to each other. I'll show you a graphic in a minute. But in any case, as we go around this wheel, this great wheel here, this wheel of this cosmic wheel, what we're going to see is that each of these is a zodiacal sign. We have here Pisces, we have here Aquarius. So now the vernal equinox is poised. It's moving out of the star constellation of Pisces, moving into the star constellation of Aquarius. And so we say that roughly for the last 2,000, or if we want to be precise, 2,160 years, the vernal equinox has been transiting the constellation of Pisces, and therefore we've been in the Piscean age. Prior to that was Aries, prior to that was Taurus. We find that the beginning of modern recorded history goes back to the Taurian age. We can essentially express all of recorded human history between the latter part of the Taurian age through the age of Aries, the age of Pisces, and now into the age of Aquarius, right?
Okay, so something that's really interesting about this, I don't think he talks about this in this one, he may, but so we've been in the age of Pisces here for approximately the last 2,000 years. And it's very interesting that the symbol of the Christians, the early Christians, was the fish. That the fish is a symbol that's been associated with Christianity for 2,000 years.
The year of our Lord.
Mm-hmm. And then prior to that, so if you go back another approximately 2,000 years, you get back to the time of Moses, and you have the entire, that 2,000 year history there was predominated by the worship of Baal. And you have Moses coming down off of Mount Sinai with the people of Israel worshiping the golden calf. So the age before that was Aries the ram. So you have the whole sacrificial system with the ram, and prior to that was Taurus the bull with the calf. So there's a pattern that's forming here. There's something significant about the goings on in the world in these eras with respect to the astrological house that the sun happens to be rising in within that given period of time. And if you move back even further, you go back to approximately 10 or 12,000 years ago, when long before the Sphinx was supposed to have been built, you'll find the Sphinx, which is situated facing due east, pointed directly at the solstice. The Sphinx was originally, like, the head that it has on it now is like the head of a pharaoh, and it's way too small proportionally to its body, and it has the body of a lion. So it makes sense that era around the time of the Younger Dryas catastrophe was in the time of Leo. So it makes sense if the Sphinx was built during that time. Were you about to say something?
No, I'm just sniffling.
Okay.
Okay. If we go back, we'll notice, though, that the numbers here are the same numbers, the same family of numbers we've been looking at here. 2160, 4320, 6480, 8640, 10,800. We saw the number 108. I called your attention to that when I was asking you what was the atomic weight of silver and which metal, which astronomical object is silver associated with? The moon, yes. 12,960 puts us exactly on the opposite end of the equinoctial axis. And then we see at right angles to each other, we have, this is the autumn-spring axis, and this is the summer-winter axis. And they're at right angles to each other. The whole thing is rotating. You've got a picture that this propeller is rotating counterclockwise. So that in 6,480 years, Taurus will have moved down to the 0 point. Okay, we've seen this. So this is just a recap of those same numbers. And you will notice 8640, the number of seconds in one day. You'll notice that in a half a day, 43,200. Well, if you go back to the dawning of the age of Aries, 4,320 years ago. And these are just more interesting ways that these numbers show up. If you take 25,920 seconds and set each second corresponding to 1 year of the great year, you'll discover it's exactly 432 minutes. 25,920 hours in turn is 1,080 days. And 25,920 days is equal to 72 years in the sacred calendar. Which is interesting because I think most determinations of the average human lifespan right now in history is about 72 years. So you could think of a human lifespan as being equivalent to 1 day of the great year. There's an interesting proportional relationship going on there between the total processional cycle of 25,920 years and one human lifetime. In the Vedas, they had various ways of encoding references to numbers. Let the Brahman hear the praise we utter. This hath the four-horned buffalo emitted. 4 are his horns, 3 are the feet that bear him, his heads are 2, his hands are 7 in number. Notice 4, 3, 2, raised to the 7th power. gives you the number of years in the ancient Vedic time span, the Kalpa, 4,320,000,000 years, which I find to be suspiciously close to the modern estimate for the age of the universe, which is about 4.5, or the age of the Earth rather, which is about 4.5 billion years. So this was one way they had of encoding or embedding references to these sacred numbers in the Vedas. And this is probably some of the...
This is where I feel obligated to inject and say, I'm sorry, Space Santa, but that's gay. The universe is not 4.5 billion years old.
Right. The universe is like, I don't know. How long
It's
ago
like
was
100 years old.
How long was 1776? How long ago was that?
Like 250 odd years.
Yeah, that's when history began and the founding fathers wrote the Bible.
That's right. You got to get on board.
Greatest country on the planet.
Mm-hmm. Got to go like stand out in the rain, shirtless with a flag.
The oldest writings
Fuck, man, I love being an American.
This canon of numerology is presented. In ancient Sumeria, from the various writings of historians like Berossus and others, and from the Sumerian clay tablets, we're able to find that there were references to 10 pre- or antediluvian kings. What does pre-diluvian mean? Before the flood, right. So they had this belief that there were 10 kings reigning before the flood. And you'll notice the numbers that they ascribed to each of the kings, the reign. Those numbers now should all be becoming familiar to you. You've seen a bunch of them already. There's 43,200, 64,800, 36. You'll notice 64,800 is presented twice, actually 3 times. The total, though, 432,000 years. That's a long span of time. Do you think they meant this literally, or is this strictly symbolic and figurative? Is it possible that a king could have reigned for 36,000 years? I tend to think it was symbolical, but it is interesting that one of the universal traditions from ancient cultures is that before the flood, and all the cultures from all over the world recognized that there was a great flood, or even floods that decimated humanity at various times, but they're all pretty much in agreement that prior to the flood, the human lifespan was much longer than it is today, which I find we've all heard about Methuselah living to be 969 years, right? Or Lamech being 777. It seems that they had, in the biblical ages, they seem to have lived about an order of magnitude greater than our modern ages. Which, considering, from my perspective, the things I'd like to get done in this lifetime, I would need at least that many years. In the Vayu Purana, which is again one...
Hey, Cooper. Symbolical.
Yeah. I don't like it.
Oh. Cooper and I have had this conversation before that it drives us crazy when people excessively, what's the term? Like superlativize. Yeah.
Suffixifies.
Yeah. Yeah. Like symbolical, symbolic. Or instantaneous. Instantly or instantaneously. This is unnecessary. You don't need the extra suffixes. Yes.
It's like misogynist, and people say misogynistic.
Uh-huh.
You don't have to add that ick.
Yes.
You're giving me the ick.
Yeah. Take it back.
Yeah.
Yes. RIP or RIP. I don't know which you prefer to be known by, but I definitely said nice in my head when he said 969 too.
In the Vedas, we find verses like this. 360 years, according to the human calculation, constitute one divine year. Wise people know that there are 4 yugas in Bharatavarsa. The first one is Kreta, then follow Treta, Dvapara, and Kali. Probably some of you have heard of the Kali Yuga that we're supposedly in right now, and suppose the age of darkness and the age of ignorance. But you'll notice that they reckon time. They have another. The Vedas recognize as a sacred year that they call, or a divine year, which is 360 of our years. Okay, now here's a tabulation of the Vedic ages, and you'll notice we'll look first at the total in human years, and we see that the Kali Yuga, the shortest, is 432,000. And then we go to 864,000, 1,296,000, 1,728,000, and 4,320,000. You'll notice that the total, or the Maha Yuga, the Great Yuga, is 10 times the length of the Kali Yuga. And that's because you'll notice that the Dwapara is twice, the Treta is 3 times, and the Satya is 4 times. So taking the original term, doubling it, then tripling it, then quadrupling it, adding those together will give us 10 times the number we started with. But again, notice the number that the Vedic ages begins with, 432,000, is the same number that the Sumerian king list ends with. So it's almost as if we have 2 different traditions, but one system. And we see that the Sumerians preserve knowledge about the subdivisions of this Yuga time of 432,000 years, and symbolize these subdivisions by the reigns of these 10 pre-Diluvian kings. And then we can see that once we get to 432,000 years, at that point the Vedic cycles kick in, and then we have these that follow. And using the divine year of 360 years yields this column of numbers. And then when we put the duration into human years, it's interesting. Each of the yugas, such as the Kali Yuga, they were all believed to have a period of transition into the age, then the age itself, and then a period of transition out of the age. And so basically what they did was they took the total age. You'll notice here the relationship between the Kali Yugas, the 360,000, and the Sandhya, which was the transition in, and the Sanyamsa, which was the transition out, are each 1/10 of that, adding up to the total of 432. But you'll notice that we've got the same recurring numbers again. There's 144,000 right there. And then we have that raised by another order of magnitude. So you see how these same numbers are recurring over and over again. And I would suggest that there's a pattern emerging here. And I know that for a lot of people, first time they are confronted with this kind of information, sometimes it's almost too mind-boggling. You're going, what the heck does all these numbers mean? It's just too many numbers to sort out. But what you realize once you start studying them is that each one of them is kind of a mnemonic, because each number has a whole collection of phenomena that's associated with it. And it's still in use today. I mean, how many people, everybody should.
So that's a good point with the way he said that there, that each number is a mnemonic. It's like a learning device. It's like this is what a number is. A number is a symbol that we use to capture a certain kind of meaning. So when we use the number 8, we're capturing the meaning of the 8 things.
Yeah.
This is like the rudimentary way of that numbers have been historically used. And when you start seeing these patterns, there's something significant about these particular numbers. There's connections that they have between them that aren't happenstance, because the universe is not random chaos. There's actually an order and a structure to the universe, and numbers are one of the ways that we can perceive that structure.
Rip says, "Man, those diaper-wearing curry eaters were onto something." And when you mention that, Duffhead says the shit-eating mud people making appearance again. And I've never actually thought about this, but now that you mention it, as a people, they've really kind of regressed, don't you think? I'm inclined to think that their ancestors were maybe a bit more sophisticated than them.
Yeah, I guess. I wonder where that sophistication came from, and I wonder
Maybe.
where it went to.
Maybe like from the European portion of the Indo-European
Yeah.
connection.
Well, I don't know. It seems like the more that connection gets formalized, the worse off they are.
Yeah, that's true.
Shitting in rivers and whatnot. Hey, I'm a pretty big fan of a bidet. I've only used one once, but when I build a house, it's going to have bidets in it. So maybe there's something to it that we just don't appreciate.
Yeah, but
That's
you're not supposed to feed your sewage water into your drinking water.
Oh,
into the same source.
No wonder we've had a stomach ache for the last couple of weeks.
Dude, I gotta tell you a story. So my brother gets back from Poland, and the week before he's leaving Poland, he and his wife both come down with like some intestinal bacterial infection or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have to go to the doctor and get antibiotics or whatever, and they're fine now. But the doctor was asking them, like, did you guys just get here from like the third world or something? And they're like, no, we've just been here. It's like, where'd you get that? And they're like, I don't know, must have ate something bad. And then he was telling me, after relating those details, I don't think he told this to the doctor, but they like a couple days prior to going to the doctor's office, or like a week prior or whatever, they went and had dinner at their Indian friend's house in Poland, who had cooked them a meal. And that they can't think of anywhere else it came from but there. And I wonder, like, Indian people just must have like iron stomachs.
Uh-huh.
Maybe there is some value in drinking shit, like shit water from the time you're a baby. It's like just nothing kills you. If you make it through that, that filter, then you're unstoppable.
It's like natural hormesis.
Yeah.
Hormesis
I
is
do
where
remember
it's like you drink a little bit of
remember.
poison
I'm pretty slow right now. My noggin feels like it's stuffed full of cotton.
All right, we're gonna keep watching because we're only 35 minutes into this, and we've already been going for an hour and 15 minutes.
Oh joy!
Square
I'll
foot,
stick around as
144
long as I
square
can.
inches. I mean, anybody who's a builder, a craftsperson, an artist should know basic rules of measurement. The Mayan world ages. Now you notice there, do we see similar numbers? The Baktun, 144,000 days. So it's almost like they had the same numbers, but they're now representing smaller cycles. But it's the same numbers representing these cyclical periods within nature. A tun is 360 days, and that was the sacred calendar that we find all over the ancient world. And then they had the 5 days added to that, the 5 unlucky days. So again, we see the same numbers being repeated redundantly throughout these various traditions. Sacred numbers embedded in solar system architecture. I'm only going to show you a few examples of this in order to convey to you the idea. The solar orb, well, if we measure that, we discover its radius is 432,000 miles, which of course means that its diameter is 864,000 miles. So notice that we measure the sun according to the human measure of miles. And by the way, what is the origin of the mile unit that we use? Anybody know? Origin of the mile? Origin of the mile, it comes from the Latin word mil, which means 1,000. So it's talking about 1,000 something. What would it be talking about? 1,000 what? 1,000 paces. That average 5.28 feet in length. It actually goes back, we know that Romans were using a mile that were 1,000 paces, and they would lay out, Rome, for example, had a city center, and everything was measured outwards from that city center according to paces. And those paces were 1,000 of them gave the Roman mile. The Roman pace was a little bit shorter than the British pace, which is where we get our mile from. Our mile, in fact, interestingly, and I'm going to show you a diagram of this shortly, Stonehenge is 105, the outer ring of the Sarsen stone circle measures right at about 105.6 feet, which makes it 1/5 of a mile, or 1/50th of a mile, I'm sorry. That and several other numbers that we find in megalithic structures in ancient England suggest that the mile was actually a unit of measure that was being used as long ago as 4,000 years or longer. And we're still using it today, the same unit of measure that could have been used 4,000 years ago. And for that reason, and once you begin to get into and understand the sacred basis of our ancient metrological or measuring systems, you realize that if we convert completely over to the metric system, we're going to lose something very, very profound. All right, remember what was the length of the Kali Yuga? 400.
Hell yeah, America, baby. Fuck your metric system. Melaforta makes a really interesting point here. Hadn't thought about this, but you have just you have dug my heels in even further on this. She says the 3 wise men used astrology to track down Christ's nativity, and the church honors them. That's very, very. I had never even considered that, but you could say in a very literal sense it was astrology that led them to Christ. I wouldn't get too carried away with that, but there's a truth in there.
I'm trying to remember. Come on, brain. I remember Randall Carlson saying something at one point. So like, he was talking about the degree.
Uh-huh.
Oh, never mind. Completely unrelated to this, but I remember hearing him talk about these plasma generator things, and that the angle that is required to have no turbulence or have the minimal amount of turbulence when injecting water into the fucking or the plasmoids into the sphere to start spinning or whatever is the exact same degree as the slope of the Great Pyramid.
Yes.
Isn't that mind-boggling?
There's a little tease of some of what's to come. They found and also the structure that they use in the dimensions of the different tubes is 4321. That's or 432 rather. That's the like after a bunch of testing, like that's the structure that makes the thing function best is having that 432 structure.
32,000 years. What was the length of the Dwapara Yuga? 864,000 years. What was the length of a Platonic month? 1/12 of the great year. Anybody remember? 2,160 years, right? The same number of degrees that measure the cube. All right, what are we looking at here? Anybody recognize that? Look familiar?
The
Earth
Earth
has a radius of 1,080 miles, which gives it a diameter of 2,160. Remember I said that 1,080 or 108 and it's double, 2160 was a lunar number. See, this is a clue to you now. There are several references, for example, in the Sumerian tradition describing the ark built by Sisyphus, which is being described as a cube. That makes no sense. You think, what kind of a ship is it that would be described as a cube? You know, that wouldn't be very seaworthy, a cube, right? But it's not referring to an actual ship as we think of it. It's referring to the cubing of the sphere. And in this case, the sphere that it's referring to is the moon, which was symbolically considered to be an ark to many of the ancient cultures that believed that the earth was periodically destroyed by great catastrophes. So we have the number 1,080, and we have the number 2160. And then we have the earth. You know, that's the earth. And again, because of the spinning of the earth on its axis, we have this difference between the polar diameter, 7899, or just thinking round number, 7,900 miles, and the equatorial diameter, 7,926. So that creates a 26-mile difference. And thank you for that 26-mile difference, because life on Earth would be a very chaotic affair without that bulge. We see that the diameter of a sphere with the same surface area as Earth is 7,920 miles. And also the diameter of the Earth, when you take it from, if you slice it through the Tropic of Cancer through to the Tropic of Capricorn, that diameter also is about 7,920. So we use 7,920 as the sacred number to represent the Earth, because even though the Earth varies considerably between equatorial and polar diameters, we find that at a very significant piercing through of the Earth's diameter from one tropic to the other tropic turns out to be 7,920 miles. We also find that if we take a perfect sphere that has the same area, the same surface area as the Earth actually has, its diameter would be 7,920 miles. So that's the number we use for the Earth, which means that its radius is half that, or 3,960. And in most books you read, astronomy and so forth, when they're talking in round numbers about the radius or the diameter of the Earth, these are the numbers they use. 7920 and 3960.
So notice again, using that digital root, if you take the 7920 number, you add 7 and 9 is 16, add 2 is 18, 1 plus 8 is 9. And what this is doing is just finding out what root number, what single digit number has the closest relationship to this number. So any number that you have, no matter how big or how small, you can find out which single digit number it's like related back to. And the way you discover that is through this digital root the digital root technique.
Does the digital root technique, does it help with like determining ratios?
What do you mean?
I don't know, man. I might have to duck out here in a minute. I'm
Okay.
slowing down.
Yeah.
A little bit of power that nap gave me is slipping through my fingers.
All right. I'm gonna keep plowing forward.
Yeah, you do that. Just keep plowing her.
Okay. Now, what I've got here is evidence for advanced geodetic knowledge in archaic times. What is geodesy or geodetic knowledge? Geodesy is the determination of the size and the shape of the Earth. Early in the 19th century, such knowledge was acquired by extensive land surveying and triangulating over large tracts of the Earth's surface. Since the 1970s, orbital satellites have provided the most accurate picture of the Earth's exact size and mass distribution. Any advanced comprehension of the larger picture of our planet as a suitable abode for the evolution of higher life requires knowledge of its size.
The typos on this are killing me. The last one, it said equatorial instead of equatorial. And this one, it says a suitable adobe instead of a suitable abode.
And shape. The total mass, of course, determines...
Isn't it Adobe? Isn't that like one of those terracotta houses or something?
Yeah.
The ones that Trump's going to nuke when he gets into office?
That's right. Yeah. Missiles to Mexico.
Yeah, right.
The bulge is an integral component of the forces acting to impose rotation and orbital stability on Earth as it wheels about the sun. The relevance of these two basic factors to the evolution of life cannot be underestimated. Ancient master builders understood Earth's fundamental geodetic parameters on a level not equaled until the advent of modern satellite surveys. How do we know that? Well, probably the most salient means we have of knowing that is the Great Pyramid of Cheops itself. And there's been lots and lots of speculation about what the form or what the function of the Great Pyramid was. Some of it to me is pretty out there. Some of it I think is pretty abstract and speculative. What I've always thought does make the most sense and has the greatest credibility is the pyramid is essentially a model of the Earth, the northern hemisphere, and I'll show you how here. The thing you have to understand when you're looking at the measurement of the Earth in terms of its size and shape is that we have lines. Everybody knows latitude and longitude. Latitude is measured north and south of the equator. Longitude is the measure around this way. Parallels are lines that run parallel to the equator. And traveling along one of the parallels, we would be displacing ourselves longitudinally. But parallels actually measure, you can see, this parallel here, this is probably the Arctic Circle. It looks to me like about 66.5 degrees north. So it is parallel to the equator, right? So depending on what parallel you are, every line of latitude, north and south, has a corresponding parallel. And you know that from the equator to the North Pole is going to be 90 degrees, and likewise from the equator to the South Pole is going to be 90 degrees of arc. Then in turn we have meridian lines, which are lines that run north-south, but actually measure distances east and west. So that if you traveled from one meridian to the next to another meridian, you would have traveled from east to west. Every point on the surface of the Earth has a local meridian. We have a local meridian here, and it's basically the way you would find it is if you walked out here. I believe this is generally south, isn't it, this way? So if we went out here and we looked exactly south and exactly north, and then the zenith overhead, the point 90 degrees up from a flat horizon, and we struck an arc from South Point through the zenith point to the North Pole, that arc would be our local meridian. And as the Earth turns under that local meridian, we measure all astronomical motion relative to our point on the surface of the Earth with respect to that local meridian. Now, you'll notice that as you go through the parallels form virtually perfect circles. The meridian lines, on the other hand, are not circles because of the flattening of the Earth. Because of the expansion of the equator, if you draw a line around it this way, and cut the Earth this way, it is not going to be a circle. If you cut it this way, it will be a circle. Okay, that creates very subtle differences in geometry. When you're measuring a meridian line north to south, what happens is that as you travel north away from the equator, if you were going on a perfect sphere, then each degree of latitude north would have the same distance. But it's not a perfect sphere, it's flattened. So as you're moving towards the North Pole, the Earth is actually flattening out. The Earth's radius is shrinking. So it's flattening out. What that means is that to traverse a degree of arc, you have to travel further as you get away from the equator towards the North Pole. Okay, I'm explaining this because you've got to understand this to see how the ancients actually understood, how they demonstrated to us that they understood the size and shape of the Earth with a high degree of accuracy. So again, parallels are to be in circles, and you're going to notice that the biggest circle is going to be the equatorial circle, and as you travel towards the poles, those circles get smaller in size. So therefore, if you took the meridian lines, which would be the dotted lines, the distance between, say, 1 degree of meridians at the equator is going to be greater than that distance between the same two meridians, say, at our latitude here in Atlanta, which is about 34 degrees north, or further north. As you travel further north, those meridian lines...
You can see this visually a lot better than, explaining it is kind of difficult because it's really abstract, but you can see it right here in the way the Earth is being portrayed. You can see that as it's getting closer and closer to the top here, the distance between this line and this line is less and less and less. So the meridians here are getting closer and closer to one another as they get closer to the top of the Earth. So they're not the web that's being formed here is not perfect squares.
Lines converge until you get to the North Pole, and then they meet each other and have zero distance between them. Okay, this is taken out of the Smithsonian meteorological tables, and what we're looking at here, without belaboring this, is you'll notice latitude 0 degrees, and you go through up to 90 degrees. What this is showing is if we look into statute miles right there, this says length of 1 degree of the meridian. So this is the line from equator up to the North Pole. Well, if you look at the first number, which, let's see if we can zoom in a little here, you'll notice that at 0, when you leave the equator and go to the first degree north latitude, you've gone 68.703 miles. But if you look down here at the very last one, when you traverse that last degree from 89 and you finally get to the North Pole, you've traveled 69.4 miles. So those degrees have stretched out. Okay, now this is important to understand how the ancients were able to demonstrate to future generations that they understood the size and the shape of the Earth. And then we have one length of 1 degree of the parallel. If you notice right there, I don't know if you can read it from out there, but that says 69.172 miles. So think of a circle going around the Earth's equator. You've traveled 1 degree, 1/360 of that distance around. You've gone 69.172 miles. Let's go halfway up from equator to North Pole, which would be 45 degrees, and you see right there, you've gone 49 miles. Then when you get up to the pole itself, when you're 1 degree away from the North Pole, you only have to go 1.2 miles because those meridian lines have converged. So now, the thing to grasp here is that if we're measuring the size and the shape of the Earth, that's going to vary depending on where on the Earth we're making those measurements. This is important because what we discover is that the ancient peoples knew this and incorporated it into their architecture so that they would derive units of measurement that were ultimately based upon the size and shape of the Earth where the structure was being built. Now let's take the most prominent one. Before we get to that, this is geodetic data, and you'll notice here we've got going back to 1830, which was the first attempt in modern times to determine the size and shape of the Earth. And let's go, so that's meters, let's go to something we'll recognize, miles. We're talking about the radius here, and you'll notice as you're coming down through here, we get to these last two. World Grid System 72 and Geodetic Reference System 80 are the two that were determined by satellite measurements. And you'll notice that as we come through here, we've got a polar radius in miles and an equatorial radius in miles, and then we have the difference in the two radii right here. And we assume that as we've come through, we're progressively getting better and better at measuring the size and shape of the Earth. And finally, with satellite measurements, we're getting down here, and we've determined that the polar radius, for example, 3,949.8934, 3,949.8948. What does that translate into? Well, let's see. In terms of feet, that's a difference of, 250 feet, roughly, between between these two measurements. In other words, between the first satellite measurement in 72 and the second one in 1980, the difference was about 250 feet, say.
The history of man may be far longer and stranger than we think. The Great Pyramid may indeed not fit in with what we believe about the past and the nature of the world. Thousands of years ago, someone measured the Earth with remarkable accuracy and recorded this information in the dimensions of the largest and possibly the oldest stone building on the planet. William R. Fix.
Generally, the age of the pyramid is given around 4,200 years, it's roughly about the same age as the Sphinx. Some of you are probably familiar with the redating of the Sphinx by several geologists, primarily Robert Schoch from Boston University, who has studied the weathering of the limestone composing the Sphinx and the surrounding quarry that the Sphinx is situated in, and has determined that the rock has been severely weathered by water erosion. And of course, this Giza Plateau has been desert for the last 4,000 years, so it's not likely you're going to find severe water erosion on the Sphinx if it's only 4,000 years old. In fact, so severe is the water erosion that it's likely that the Sphinx is probably tens of thousands of years old. However, Robert Schoch, in most of his public presentations, usually places it at 7,000 to 9,000 years, but he's told me personally he just uses that because he's deliberately being very conservative because he's in the academic community, but he's perfectly willing to believe that it could be much older than that. And I've discussed the extent of the water erosion with him and discovered that he actually hasn't looked in depth at the comparable studies of rates of limestone weathering, which I spent a couple of months about 10 years ago studying, going around various places where there were limestones and where you could see examples of limestone that had been weathered, and had looked at, read the literature that had been done on limestone weathering, and had concluded that it would be a minimum of 20,000 years worth of weathering. And that's a minimum if you took the Sphinx and set it in a climate with rainfall, like say we've been having for the last 3 months, which would average out to about 45 inches a year. Even with rainfall like we've been seeing here in Atlanta in the last 3 months, it would take the Sphinx a minimum of 20 to 30,000 years to get the level of erosion. That raises the question regarding the Great Pyramid. Could it be as old? And I see no reason why not. Problem here, though, is that the Great Pyramid was once covered in white limestone casing stones, highly polished, and according to Arabic traditions, pretty much all the Arabic traditions and legends about the Great Pyramid concur that the outside of the pyramid prior to the stripping of the casing stones was covered, completely covered in hieroglyphs. One, it just boggles one's mind to contemplate what might have been written there. But clearly, I have a hard time imagining a greater act of vandalism in all of history than the stripping of those stones. In fact, there had been efforts to get into the pyramid up until the time of Al-Mamun, which was, I think, around 1200 AD, but they were completely ineffectual. And then somewhere around the 12th century, I've forgotten the exact year, there was a great earthquake in northern Egypt. And it caused most of the buildings in Cairo to collapse, and it also loosened some of the casing stones on the pyramid, which allowed them to get in and pry those stones loose from the top. And all of the stones were then stripped off, and that indurate high-quality limestone was stripped off and recarved and used in buildings to rebuild Cairo. So I've often thought there's probably temples somewhere in Cairo where maybe some of those original stones are still to be found with inscriptions intact. Of course, I have no idea, but I oftentimes thought, wouldn't that be cool? Anyways, they stripped off the stones, and
I was listening to a guy recently. I can't remember his name. It's Ben something. He's done some shows with Randall, and he said that he was talking to someone in Egypt recently who was speculating that it was an Egyptologist or archaeologist or something like that was speculating that even now they've only uncovered something like 30% of what is there to be uncovered associated with the pyramids and the Sphinx and everything around it, because everything else is covered in sand. And the sand blows and moves around, and guys follow along, and when the sand dunes, they blow up into a dune, it creates a trough, and they go and they'll dig around in that trough and look for stuff that's being uncovered. And they're discovering new things all the time because the dunes get moved, and it uncovers those things that are still in there. The problem with all of this is there is a bureaucratic body that is responsible for access to the pyramid, and any sort of study that is done or any sort of information that's drawn out from it has to be released with their say-so. They're called
Supreme Council.
Yeah, they used to be. They've got some sort of more kind of bland bureaucratic name now, but they used to be. They were called like the Supreme Council of Egyptian Antiquities or something along those lines.
So cool.
Yeah, right. So and then
I sit on the Supreme Council of the
you're
Great
right,
Pyramid.
right. And the guy who's the head of it is had a falling out with Graham Hancock. So there's a lot of political incentive to maintain a strict control over what's publicly known and understood about the pyramids and anything associated with them. Natashki says the pyramids were most likely giant energy conductors. I agree with that. I think that's very true.
As they stripped them off, there was a lot of rubble that fell down and buried the bottom of the pyramid, which turned out to be a good thing because it buried the bottom casing stones from those bottom and preserved them. And so from those, the various researchers could determine what the original exact angle of the pyramid was. And according to most calculations, it was around 51 degrees, 51 minutes, 14 seconds. I don't know if that level of accuracy is credible or not, but 51 degrees, 51 minutes would be. And from there, we can then determine what the geometry of the pyramid would have been and what its original height would have been simply by taking the tangent of that angle, 51 degrees, 51 minutes, and knowing the base length, one could calculate what the original height would have been to a high degree of accuracy. So that's been done by, 4 or 5 different people over the years. J.H. Cole in 1925 did what's considered to be the definitive survey of the Great Pyramid. He was a professional surveyor who did a very meticulous survey after they had just cleared away all of the rubble, and he had access to it. He did it under contract to the government of Egypt. The numbers that I'm about to show you here are mostly derived from his survey. So what we have here is here's some of the original casing stones, and they sit on what's called a socle, which is this base, which was measured to be 55 centimeters in thickness. And of course, you got to bear in mind that this original slope casing stone, it wasn't stepped like that originally. It was a smooth profile. And okay, so here you have, of course, here you see that the casing stones were damaged by the rubble falling down, but enough of them were still intact that one could make this accurate determination of the original angle. Here's the socle, which is 55 centimeters thick, and it sits directly on bedrock. So it actually, what it does is it creates 2 ways that one could measure the height of the pyramid, either with or without the socle. There's also 2 ways of measuring the base. This is a reconstruction from a 1991 work on pharaonic stone masonry, and this shows that outside the corners, which was the core masonry, there are these sockets, and I found one picture showing a socket. This is showing one of the sockets that's still there, that sits outside the core masonry. But based on those sockets, they were able to reconstruct what the original base of the pyramid would have looked like. So here would have been the 51 degrees, 51 minutes coming down, sitting on the 55 centimeter thick socle here, like this. Well, what this did was it gave 2 ways of measuring the perimeter of the pyramid's base. One could be measured from this point up on top of the socle. The other could be measured from down here that included the socle. So what you ended up with was 2 ways of measuring the pyramid's base. Well, which one was the correct one? Well, they were both correct. I think that they were actually intending to embody in there that there were 2 ways of measuring the pyramid's base. So what we have is the length of the base on the socle, which is the shorter of the 2 up there. It was varied from side to side. You'll notice 755 at the smallest to 756 just over at the largest. So there was some variation. There's probably a reason for that variation, actually, but we won't get into that because it just gets too technical for what we're talking about today. But the total of those measured around the 4 sides would be 3,023.139 feet. If you're taking notes, that'd be a good number to write down. Okay, so now let's see what the measure is around that includes the socle, or the base. And we see that each side is roughly 5 feet longer, 760 to 761. Each side, again, is a little different, but we get a total of 3,043.433 feet. Okay, so I'm going to write down a few numbers that we saw through our radius of the moon, diameter of the moon, radius of the sun, diameter of the sun.
So the numbers he's writing down for the people listening on the audio is 1,080 is the radius of the moon, 2,160 is the diameter of the moon, 432,000 for the radius of the sun, and 864,000 for the diameter of the sun. And the specific numbers, you don't necessarily need to memorize all these specific numbers as you're listening, especially the things like the perimeter value for the pyramids. You don't need to remember those specifically. He's going to show the significance of it here in a minute. But I just wanted to address real quick something Rip had said. Doesn't this guy, meaning Randall Carlson, suspect that as well? The energy generator idea with the pyramid, and yeah, Randall's very open to. It's very clear that there was some kind of a technological application for it, that it was not strictly a ceremonial structure. We're still trying to figure out exactly what that technological application was.
Nah, dude, they were just tombs that were built for the pharaohs over the course of 3 generations, like 4,000 years ago or something.
Right. Yeah, the most improper. What's funny is that it's like, okay, so given how, just pardon the pun, astronomically sophisticated these structures are, the idea that they were built in this really narrow time frame implies that the people that built them were even more sophisticated than the standard record would have.
No,
you
dude, they were just
believe.
using copper tools and sticks and fucking just laying, the blocks on logs and rolling them across the desert for 100 miles.
Right? Yeah, like 1,000
And then-
ton rocks.
And then whipping the ancient Jews to drag them up on top. And
It's the first of many hoaxes, huh?
uh-huh.
All right.
Number of seconds in a day would be 43,200. Number of seconds in a half a day, number of seconds in a full day, 86,400. What were some of our more other numbers? Oh yeah, 1440 was one, 7920. Diameter of the Earth, just so they're up there in front of you. We can refer to them as we go on here. All right. So here is profile, the Great Pyramid with a 51-degree, 51-minute angle. I've just, to make it easy, I've just rounded off the numbers, 481 feet in height. That would be not including the socle, the base. 755.85, I just picked one to use. And there's our 51-degree, 51-minute angle. And we find that when we measure it this way, it turns out to be almost exactly 11/7. There's some other interesting geometry going on related to the golden section, which I don't intend to get into today because it makes more sense if you're actually studying sacred geometry and you're familiar and you've made these drawings. Because in a sacred geometry class, just like in the old Pythagorean and Platonic lodges, we draw, and then we eventually build models. And that's the way to really get familiar with this and get these numbers as part of your consciousness. So I'm not going to get into the connection with the golden section today. When we measure, including the socle, this becomes our height, 482.7575 feet, and the base, 760.9 feet. Okay, those are the numbers we're going to look at for a second here now. If we look at these are various estimates. We're looking at this one right here, the coal height estimate plus the socle at 21.6 inches gives a total of the height above bedrock of 482.7575 feet. So now we're going to go back to the Earth so we can see how these numbers link the two. We take 1 square degree of latitude and longitude at the equator. Pretend we're standing.
What?
Did he say, was it 1200 BC or 1280 that people started stripping the face stones
80.
off of the pyramid? 80? Really?
Yeah.
That recent? Man,
Oh yeah.
that's a bummer, dude.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Who knows how much, how much has been lost, and
It's kinda like-
how much is out there, but it's just hidden in the back rooms of some museums.
Some
or
dude's
something.
house.
Yeah.
Things like that, like the defacing of the Great Pyramids, or the burning down of the Library of Alexandria, like things like this just kind of make me mad.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, supposedly
Like on the other hand,
there's
on
really
the other
strong
hand,
evidence that there's a hall of records underneath the Sphinx, but it's like impossible to get access to. And even if you were to actually get access to it, anything really important or significant would be cleared out first.
yeah, probably. Like I suspect there's probably some degree of God's providence that these materials no longer exist.
Mm-hmm.
But still kind of bums me out.
There was something in the chat here that I wanted.
It's like the Nag Hammadi library that was just like buried in the desert for like 2,000 years or something like that, or 1,500 years or whatever.
Or even
they uncover it, and they uncovered it like 100 years ago or whatever, and it's just a bunch of Gnostic texts.
And
it's like, oh yeah, okay. What was really interesting about that discovery is up until that point, all the academics would read like Against Heresies by Saint Irenaeus, and be like, oh, this guy's full of shit, and he's he's totally biased. And they dig up the Nag Hammadi library, which has a lot of the actual texts by these thinkers, the Gnostic thinkers, and it's like Saint Irenaeus was 100% correct about all of them. So I thought that was interesting.
I wonder if he studied the Gnostics and what they believed at all before he wrote his critiques of them.
Yeah, it's almost like he knew all this stuff, lived around these people, had to deal with them every day.
Right. Here is the This is the pyramid at Teotihuacan in Mexico. This was it in 1900. So it's just like a hill with some trees and bushes and stuff growing on it. And then someone realized, wait a second, this is a pyramid. And this is what it's like now, all completely excavated. And there's all sorts of the geometric idiosyncrasies encoded in the Great Pyramid. There's many of the same patterns exist in the Mexican pyramids. And I think a lot of people know that the three pyramids of Giza are in the same astronomical alignment with the three stars from Orion's belt. What I learned recently is that I believe it's Teotihuacan and the Great Pyramid, and then one of the pyramids in like Malaysia or Indonesia or something like that. They are themselves situated the same way, as if the three of them together are like reflecting the stars in Orion's belt. So, I mean, it's one thing. It's amazing to think of the builders of the Egyptian pyramids having that understanding and being able to reflect it on Earth. But you've got this. These are all the way across the globe, or the
So you're saying
sphere.
that like, this pyramid, the Great Pyramid, and the Malaysian pyramid are also in astrological alignment with Orion's belt? On
Yes.
Like the same ratio or whatever?
Yes. The same positioning.
That's mind blowing.
Uh-huh. What mean? Rip here said, have y'all seen the theory that Atlantis is in Western Africa? Yeah, this is the Jimmy from Bright Insight. Yeah, Mauritania. He and Randall have talked about this, and Randall has his reasons why he doesn't believe that's it. He thinks that it's a naturally developed structure. And he has an explanation, a pretty sophisticated geologic explanation of why he believes it's naturally produced. Randall's particular theory is that the Azores in the Atlantic Ocean are the tips of the mountains of what was once Atlantis. And what caused this was you had the great ice sheets over North America where there was miles of ice. And then there was a massive comet impact. This was the thing that created the Younger Dryas climatic changes through that period. It was fragments of a comet impacting the ice sheets and causing rapid melt-off. If you go look at the scablands in the northwestern United States, just pull up Google Earth and just look at from the west coast to, I don't know, the eastern border of Montana. Just look at that and look at all of our eastern Washington, northern Idaho, eastern Oregon, all the way down to the Grand Canyon. And you can see the remnants of a massive, like, local flood, local being, covering multiple states. But it's very, very obvious. Amy and I went and hiked around in them, and you can see this is flows of water on a scale you can't even fathom. But the effect of this was all of a sudden, all that weight of all that ice on the North American continent, all that ice melted and went down into the ocean, and it caused isostatic rebound, where the Earth's crust basically flexed upward from all that weight going off of it. And at the same time, it caused the Earth's crust to collapse or subside in the Atlantic Ocean, which is what basically caused Atlantis to fall into the ocean. And there's tons and tons. He's done hours and hours of videos detailing all the evidence around the coasts of the Americas and Europe and northwestern Africa. There's tons and tons of evidence for this having happened, and the theory fits really well. And that location fits with the legends of Atlantis a lot more closely than the one in Mauritania. So I'm still inclined to believe Randall, but I think the one in Mauritania is really interesting too.
I'm a duck out.
All right. See you, buddy.
Later, everyone. Goodbye.
Okay, we know the polar radius now is 13 miles less than the equatorial radius. So what that means is that the circle this way is shorter than the biggest circle that defines the Earth is the equatorial circle. So a degree of measure on the equator is going to be the longest of any degree we measure anywhere on the Earth, the equator. Okay, the north-south is going to be a little bit shorter. And you'll notice right there, we've got 68.7 miles north to south and 69.17 east to west. So it's not a perfectly square unit, is it? It's a little bit distorted. Well, that distortion is totally significant because it's that distortion that is a measure of the Earth's departure from being a perfect sphere. And it's that departure of a perfect sphere that is very significant to us, because without that, again, Earth's orbital stability would be non-existent. Okay, so we're going to divide this up a little bit. If we take this square degree of latitude north to south, longitude east to west, and we look very carefully down in the lower right-hand corner, you're going to see something, a little square. You see that little square? That represents 1 minute, 1/60th of the degree this way, 1/60th of the degree this way. So that's 1 minute of latitude and longitude, all right? We're going to take a closer look at that, and we will see that 1 minute then is 6,045.881 north to south, 6,087 east to west, which is what we expect. The east-west should be a little bit longer, and that's 1 square minute of latitude and longitude. Okay, now we're going to divide each of those lengths into 2. We're going to divide our square minute into 1/4 sections. And here's what I want you to notice. When we do that, we take 1/4 of a square minute of latitude and longitude, look at our dimension east to west, and look at our dimension north to south. And look at these 2 numbers. In fact, here's an accurate calculation. We take the 482.755. Here's
Okay, so for the people who are listening and not watching, so he broke that down to you create these squares using the latitude and longitude lines, and you take 1 minute, 1 square minute, and then you subdivide that into 4 quarter square minutes, and the dimensions match the perimeter. So you have the perimeter of the pyramid with the socle. I love that word, socle. The perimeter of the word with the socle, the perimeter of the pyramid with the socle is 3,023.139 feet. The square minute longitudinal, the quarter square minute longitudinal number is 3,022.94. They're exceptionally close. And then the latitudinal number is 3,043.547, and the perimeter with the socle is 3,043.433. So these are within tiny fractions off of each other. And there's a difference there. And it's interesting that they created this difference in the pyramid. There's these 2 different measurements that are objectively there, and those measurements objectively are nearly identical to the measurements of the square minute in latitude and in longitude. So this is, to me, this is one of the things I've basically essentially given up on the idea of the globe Earth. I think there's way too many issues with it. But I want to understand how on the flat Earth, vortex Earth model you would do this. What's the significance? Because this is a profound significance. The fact that they would have this connection, and specifically this is location specific as well, because this same quarter of a square minute and the latitude and longitude numbers would be different if it was somewhere else on the globe, assuming it's a globe. So what I'm trying to figure out is so someone who's very well schooled in the toroidal vortex Earth model, who understands this well enough, show me how this would work, how this would map onto that. Because this is all presuming a globe Earth and the latitude and longitude numbers. Now, I'm sure that this maps onto the toroidal Earth fine. I just can't visualize it myself. And I want to know what this would imply to us. What could we learn from this if we compared these 2 things? There was a question in here that both Ann said, Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock are extremely sus because everything they point to supports and expands evolution theory and span of time. But I may be wrong. Did we come from fish or not? I don't care if we, yes, they're wrong on things. We talked about this. You may have just jumped in the stream, so I don't want to bite your head off. But we talked about this at length. I agree that they're wrong about a lot of these things. But they're not wrong about these things. These things are real. They're like demonstrable. They're presenting these things. If you think that the things they're presenting are wrong, then tell me. If you think that there's not truth to these factual things they're presenting, then I'm more than happy to hear that. But my opinion is that if they're wrong, then they shouldn't be the only ones who are studying this and thinking about it and talking about it and pondering the implications of it. That's all the more reason why we should be. This is part of We as Christians should be redeeming them, redeeming their work. They're doing it toward the wrong end. So how do we take their work and direct it toward the right end?
An accurate calculation. We take the 482.755 feet, which is the height, and what we discover is that if we multiply that by the number 43,200, which is one of our sacred numbers that we've seen right there, 43,200, it shows up in the Vedas and the Sumerian king lists, etc., etc. If we multiply the height of the pyramid by that number, this is what we come out with, 3,949.83 miles. And notice the difference between the pyramid, which I call the standard polar radius, and World Grid System 72 is only 313 feet over the entire size of the Earth. So we have essentially the pyramid being a scale model of the Earth, the northern hemisphere, at a scale of 43,200 to 1. If we take the pyramid, enlarge it by 43,200, its height, including the socle, now becomes the polar radius of the Earth within 300 feet of our satellite surveys. And the two measures of the base are exactly the difference between the east-west difference and the north-south difference at a square minute at the equator. Now, the skeptic and the reductionist would dismiss this and say, it's just a coincidence, you're just playing with numbers. And I would say, okay, you can believe what you want, but it's there. The numbers are there. You can take the surveys of Egypt by Cole. You can take the geodetic surveys. I didn't make those numbers up or I didn't fudge them. And what you discover is that when you expand it by 43,200, which, if the number was just some arbitrary number, but it turns out that the factor of expansion turns out to be one of the critical sacred numbers within the ancient systems. And so here we have the pyramid now, enlarged by 43,200 times. And another way to think of it is if we go back to this diagram right here, you'll see that as the Earth turns, every half second, it's going to turn this far. So it means that every 2 seconds, the Earth, if you're standing on the equator, in 2 seconds, the Earth has turned 143,200th part of its total orbit. So if you're standing on the equator, in 2 seconds precisely, the Earth has turned in a distance exactly equal to the distance around the base of the Great Pyramid. Now you can dismiss that as being coincidence, but the numbers don't lie. They're there. And so when William R. Fix was saying that someone somewhere thousands of years ago was able to measure the Earth with great precision, and I haven't, of course, elaborated upon all the details of this. I'm trying to give you the overall picture of how it might have worked. Referring back to our geodetic data, if we look at the various ellipsoids that give the polar radius, and then we take each of those polar radii, going from all of these ellipsoids down. The Clark ellipsoid has been the one of 1880, has been the one used in the United States for all non-military and non-NASA related measurements. We still use on a day-to-day basis. If you take a topographic map, and you're going out like a 7.5 quadrangle, and you're going out navigating with a topographic map put out by the U.S. Geological Survey, they're using the Clark ellipsoid right there. But you'll notice that when we take these various polar radii lengths in feet and divide them by 43,200, you can see the numbers we get right here. Remember, the height of the pyramid is estimated at 482.7575. So looking at this, what you'd see on here, which one would be the closest? Well, you notice it's come out very, very close to the satellite surveys. Given that it's very and see, when you got to ask yourself, well, why is there a difference between the satellite survey of 72 and the satellite survey of 80? Well, if we did another one again with as high a degree of accuracy, we would discover there's still going to be a discrepancy. And the reason is that the Earth spinning through space, there are various tidal forces working on the Earth, which are constantly causing it to distort its shape by up to 2 or 3 or 4 or 500 feet. So we never would be able to get more accurate than 300 or 400 feet, because the Earth itself is changing shape. And if we were to measure it every year for the next 10 years, we would get 10 different numbers. They'd all be very close, but they would deviate somewhat, because the Earth itself, there are tidal bulges. Where's the moon relative to the Earth? That's going to affect. If the moon and the sun are on the same side of the Earth, that will affect the shape of the Earth up to being several hundred feet measured over the diameter of the Earth. And so it is not amiss to say that the pyramid enshrines a measure of the Earth that could be considered as accurate as those determined by modern satellite surveys. That to me is a very profound insight, because it does suggest that somebody, once upon a time, was able to measure the Earth size and shape with that level of precision. And if they were able to do that, what's the implication of that? See, that's the interesting part. It does determine.
So real quick, let me pop back here. Show this image. So one thing that I do notice is from, let's see, from 1940 to, let's see, what was it? Oh, 7575. So, okay, I was thinking there was a pattern here where it was getting closer and closer to that number, but it's actually, it would have been right here, 1924, I think is the, oh, no, sorry, I was looking at the wrong digit here. So yeah, it actually is kind of getting closer They're getting closer through these last measurements being done from satellites, which I'm skeptical of to some degree. Pardon the pun. There's clearly skepticism with this, but either way, they've measured something. They've gone out and they've measured something, and it turns out that the thing that they measured is to a fine, minute detail. They've come really, really close to the what was this? This was the height of the pyramid. So just this bare fact, the bare fact that they go out and they measure the polar radius of the Earth, and it just so happens that they get a number that's almost identical to the height of the Great Pyramid, and then the height of the Great Pyramid, that number divided by 43,200 gets you the almost exactly the height of the pyramid, paired with the circumference of the pyramid, and those numbers having two different measurements of it, and both of those numbers encoding the longitude and latitude to a quarter. What was it? A quarter second, a quarter square second, or something like that. Anyways, there's way too many coincidences here. This is clearly done intentionally. So whether the Earth is a normal sphere like they tell us, which I'm kind of inclined not to believe, or if it's whatever shape it is, they're going out and they're measuring something and they're returning a value, and then these values correspond really closely to the pyramid to the degree where it shows that the building of the pyramid was done in a really sophisticated way by a people who had a lot better understanding of the world that they lived on than we did until relatively recently. What mean? I don't know yet.
Feet measured over the diameter of the Earth. And so it is not amiss to say that the pyramid enshrines a measure of the Earth that could be considered as accurate as those determined by modern satellite surveys. That to me is a very profound insight, because it does suggest that somebody once upon a time was able to measure the Earth size and shape with that level of precision. And if they were able to do that, what's the implication of that? See, that's the interesting part. Because no primitive culture, using the method of Eratosthenes in about 300 BC in Greece, he measured the Earth and was generally considered to be quite accurate because he was able to get the circumference of the Earth within about 500 miles of its actual measured circumference by using the methods available to the ancient Greeks. You see, and he was considered to be the first to measure by basically putting a stick in the ground and measuring the angle of the shadow on the longest day of the year over a couple of successive years. That's actually an exercise we do in the sacred geometry class because it's very interesting how he did it.
By the way, I see this is brought up very, very often by the people who argue for the spherical globular Earth as, this is proof. See, Eratosthenes even knew it all the way back then. You could do this exact same thing using if we lived on like a plane with a local sun, you can do the exact same experiment the same way. So it's not conclusive either way to me. I see people go to this all the time. This is the worst thing. I started listening to the flat Earth guys mostly just because I had friends who listened to them and talked about them, and I was like, okay, this sounds fun and interesting to go look at. Let me see what kind of arguments they have. And I started listening to them, and I got to be really familiar with them. My mind wasn't made up. It's still not really completely made up. I'm more just undecided, I guess. I'm a milquetoast fence sitter. But now that I've listened to them for a while and realized how sophisticated a lot of their arguments are, I listen to people argue against them, and I'm just like, it's very clear that the people who argue, especially the ones who argue most rabidly against them, don't even know what they're actually arguing against. They bring up the exact same. It's like listening to. I have the same experience that I did when, like the same experience that I would have now if I was listening to someone talk about like why women deserve the right to vote, or why liberal democracy, or why starting to make arguments. These people they start making an argument, and you're like, yeah, you don't even have the faintest clue where I'm coming from. You clearly have never actually studied the other side of this debate that you're engaging in to even be able to steelman what they're saying. That's the way it's frustrating because it's very difficult to find someone who will coherently argue for the standard model of the globe Earth, who will actually take on the most sophisticated models and arguments from the flat Earth side. I want to see that. I want to see people who are able to actually make sophisticated arguments that don't just fall into like the same old things that have already been addressed and are left unanswered to this point. Anyways, end flat Earth rant.
But he was considered to be, pretty proficient because he was able to determine that the size of the Earth the circumference of the Earth was, 25,000 miles, when it's generally considered to be about 24,800, depending on where you measure it. So he was, maybe within 50 miles of the actual dimension of the Earth, but nowhere near as close as the pyramid would have been. So even if the pyramid was built 4,200 years ago, you got to say who 4,200 years ago had the technology to measure the Earth with that degree of accuracy. Now, that we know of, nobody 4,200 years ago did, or how they would have done it, we don't know. But on the other hand, if it turns out that the pyramid could be much older, it leads us back to the, going back 10,000 or 20,000 years. This to me is one of those little, sort of like the little crack in the dike that if you don't keep it plugged, the whole edifice of contemporary knowledge could get swept away. Because we can't acknowledge that somebody 10,000 or 20,000 years ago was scientifically sophisticated. That was the days of Cro-Magnon man and Aleut living in the cave and so forth. Cavemen, which is a silly idea actually. Yes, I'm sure people did take refuge in caves when things got really crazy out here. Yes, I think people did take refuge in caves. But see, this is one of those things, again, that if you accept that it's not just a coincidence, it opens up a whole can of worms that mainstream science generally doesn't want to address. Because we're the epitome of scientific evolution right here and now, right? Nobody, before we built satellites, could have measured the Earth to within a couple of 100 feet of its actual dimensions. So, given 2 seconds of time, 143,200th part of the daily rotation, a point on the equator will travel a distance precisely equal to the perimeter of the Great Pyramid's base as measured with the socle. In 1/2 second of time, a point on the equator will rotate a distance equal to one side of the base of the Great Pyramid measured with the socle. So here you have a time and space measure integrated into one. The time measure comes in because it's the span of time that the Earth has moved. In 2 seconds, the Earth has turned and moved a distance within a fraction of an inch, being the distance around the base of the Great Pyramid. And so the height of the Great Pyramid measured with the socle is 143,200th part of the Earth's polar radius. So therefore, the Great Pyramid is a model of one hemisphere of the Earth at a scale of 1 to 43,200. So if we took the Great Pyramid and we created a duplicate and turned it upside down and put the two together base to base, that would now give us the polar diameter. One more example, the Parthenon, to show that this geodetic knowledge was still extant down to the time of the building of the Parthenon about 2,400 years ago. This is the east facade. We're all familiar with the Parthenon. It's almost as well known as the Great Pyramid. Well, if we measure its base in the manner that I'm showing here, it's 100 Greek feet. So how long was a Greek foot? A little bit longer than our modern foot of 12 inches. Before we do that, let's look at the dimensions of the Parthenon. Based upon our American feet that we use, the east facade is 101.2957 feet. So if we divide that by 100, we get the length of the Greek foot, which would have been 1.0129, etc., of our American, which are actually the British feet. Okay, I better write that down so we don't forget it. That's good enough right there. There's the width of the Parthenon measured in our American feet. And also notice the latitude of Athens, where the Parthenon is located, is 37 degrees 58 minutes north. And I'm going to write that down, 37 degrees 58 minutes. So it's almost 38 degrees north. And here we have, based upon numerical and proportional relationships augmented by extensive analysis of ancient structures, artifacts, and texts, Stecchini, who was considered one of the preeminent metrologists of the 20th century, he determined various lengths of the foot. He came up with the Greek foot of 1.011464. Now notice here we've got the width of the east facade of the Parthenon divided by 100 gives a Greek foot of 1.0129 for a difference of 0.018 inch in excess of the length of the Greek foot as calculated by Stecchini. It is acknowledged by architectural historians that the Parthenon was originally built to be 100 Greek feet in width. This would have made it equal to 101.14 English feet when built. Now if we go back to the length of 1 degree of the meridian, and we look right here at the latitude of Athens, we'll find something very interesting. Length of 1 degree of the meridian at the latitude of Athens is 68.962 miles, or 364,121.647 feet. So if we take that number and divide it by 60, it gives us the length of 1 minute of meridian arc. Then we divide that meridian arc by 60, it gives us 1 second of meridian arc. And notice what 1 second of meridian arc is, 101.1449 feet. So 1 second of meridian arc at 38 degrees north latitude, given the international ellipsoid and the Clark ellipsoid, you'll note here that it's exact. So in other words, what we have there, the total difference in length of 1 second of meridian arc at 38 degrees north latitude and the east facade of the Parthenon is 0.05 inch. But again, that's for 38 north latitude, and it's actually at 37.58. So if we make that adjustment of 2 minutes of arc south, this 0.05 pretty much just disappears into nothing. So what we have is the Parthenon, again, maybe coincidence, but here we have the Parthenon being precisely 1 second of arc of the Earth's circumference at that latitude that it's placed. Now again, that implies somebody was able to measure the Earth with incredible precision, if this isn't a coincidence. And I think the burden of proof would be on the person who tries to dismiss this as being coincidental. Because the two examples I've shown you here could be multiplied many times over. We haven't even talked about the Gothic cathedrals, and the fact that every Gothic cathedral was built with its own cubit. And that cubit is based upon a multiple or a subdivision of the meridian length at the latitude that the cathedral was built. So you could take many examples of this, and what I'm suggesting here is not necessarily that the Gothic cathedral builders of 800 years ago were able to measure the Earth with that accuracy. But then again, it does seem to imply that somebody was able to measure the Earth, that maybe there's been a tradition going back to who knows when, from the building of the pyramids, coming down through the age of the Greeks, right down to the building of the European Gothic cathedrals 800 years ago, a tradition of very sophisticated geodetic knowledge. Well, again, this opens up a huge can of worms about when people were supposed to, what they knew and when they were supposed to have learned it. So there's another dimension to this as well, and this is, I'm only going to show you a few examples out of hundreds of possible examples I could be showing you. Ancient writings, Semitic writings, and I'm coming with two examples here. The Hebrew ancient writings, which would be Kabbalistic writings, the Hebrew Old Testament, the Torah, the Midrash, all of those, and then the Greek alphabet. The New Testament was written in Greek, all of the Pythagorean and Neo-Pythagorean literature written into Greek. Well, as it turns out, both of those languages, this was prior to the advent of the Hindu-Arabic numeral system. The Hindu-Arabic numeral system is when we came up with what we now have, is we have our alphabet and we have our set of numbers. And they're two different things, right? We use our alphabet for the spoken language and written language, and we use numbers for calculating and mathematics. But they're different. You know, we don't, but prior to the advent of the Hindu-Arabic numeral system, in the Semitic languages, the same symbols that were letters were also numbers. And the key was what you see right here.
Okay, before we get into this, I wanted to respond to something that Euthanasia said here. He said, I have the same idea about young Earth theories. It seems to me things would seem younger if you take a view of somewhat regular cataclysms affecting Earth. Yeah, I agree. And ultimately, the actual debate over the age of the Earth, as can be derived from observing aspects about the Earth, is not really that interesting to me, if you're talking about like the ultimate age of the Earth, because it's kind of similar to like debating like how old Adam was when he was created. You know, was Adam created as an adult? Was he created as an embryo? Was he created as an adolescent? You know, like, could God not create an adult human that looks like an adult? Could God not create a universe that he speaks the universe into existence and it has the maybe the apparent features of being much older because there are these cycles that are built into it, and these cycles necessarily go through revolutions that, you know, you find yourself at some point in these revolutions and there's an appearance of, well, we could track this back and go back further and further and further. I think there's all sorts of issues with the dating mechanisms and everything that they use. One really interesting series is the one that Seraphim Hamilton has done with a guy named Ken Griffith on his channel, talking about the dating systems and how they're derived from some of these ancient writings, and how like the Egyptian kings list should properly, instead of being read as a sequential list of kings that ruled one after the other, after the other, after the other, that it's more like, rather than being like a list of the American presidents, it's like a list of the governors of American states, where all these, the reign of Ron DeSantis overlaps with the reign of Jay Inslee, you know, the governor of Washington, the governor of Florida. They're contemporaries of each other, but you could put them in if you were kind of trying to be a little tricky because you're a tricky boy priest scribe, then you could say, oh, actually they were sequential. These weren't coexistent; they were sequential, and so it goes back years. And I suspect this may be something like what's happened with the Vedic traditions. This sort of thing could be there. Really, it isn't that interesting to me. If somebody came up with a really compelling explanation for it, then I'd be interested in hearing about that. But it doesn't make a whole lot of difference to me. I do think that there's I feel pretty confident in, you know, something around 10 to 12,000 years, and existing maybe before that. 15,000 years would probably be, if you tried to, like, if you held a gun to my head and told me to pick a date, I'd say probably somewhere in the 15 to 20,000 year range, but I'm not hard and fast on that. And I don't really think you have to be. It doesn't matter that much. So yeah, so God could create a fully adult human. I guess you might say, would that fully adult human look like have the characteristics of aging? So could it be an adult human, but it doesn't have the things you would associate with aging. And so maybe if you apply that to the universe, then what of these dating methods are indicative of some type of aging or degradation or something like that? Yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation, and I'd be very interested to hear somebody weigh into it. But when people start talking about humans being here 200,000 or a million years or whatever, once you get outside the range of like 10 or 15, 20,000 years, somewhere in there, then my eyes just kind of glaze over and I don't take it super seriously. But it seems very clear. The cycles of catastrophe is a really big thing that it's, I would need to hear a good explanation of that how these cycles of catastrophe could be compressed. You could compress that timeline into only 6,500 years or something like that. Which I'm not opposed to that idea. I think it'd be interesting to see somebody make the case that, say, the Younger Dryas thing, which seems to have been, about 12,000 years ago, that actually was something that happened 6,500 years ago, and the Earth was created 500 years before that. And I don't know. I'm not hard and fast on either side, and I think it's silly when people get really wound up about it. Not saying you're doing that, euthanasia, obviously. Let's keep going. So now here's where I can tell. I already know people are going to get really triggered by this, again, this is just a matter of fact that this is the way that numbers were used in the past. And he goes into some stuff where like different words symbolize or have different numerical meanings, and those things I treat as probably more interesting curiosities. I don't put quite as much weight into that. Like I think he says the word spirit has some sort of numerical meaning. I think those are more interesting. Just kind of one of those little like tchotchkes sort of that you put up on your mantle and you just, wait and see if it has some sort of significant meaning later on. But that's kind of where I start diverging and being like, maybe you're reading a little too much into this, and that's being informed by your presuppositions. But there's more interesting stuff coming in addition to that. So we'll keep listening.
Called a denary system. So Aleph was 1, Bet was 2, Gimel was 3, Dalet was 4, He was 5, Wow was 6, Zion 7, and so on, down to Resh, Shin, and Tau, 200, 300, and 400. Yud, which was considered the seed of the Hebrew alphabet, had the value of 10. Okay, so units, tens, and hundreds. Then there was a symbolic component to each of the, for example, Aleph originally was the word for an ox. And Bet was originally the word for house. Gimel, originally the word for camel, and so on. Then we get to the Greek system, and it's also a denary system, units, tens, and hundreds. So alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, digamma, zeta, eta, theta, etc., 1 through 9. Then iota, kappa, lambda, mu, nu, xi, omicron, pi, kappa, 10 through 90, and so on. Rho through Sampi wasn't actually a written letter. It was just simply included to get the value of 900. Okay, so we have the same system, units, tens, and hundreds. So how was this employed? Well, here's an example. Here's aletheon, which was the Greek word for truth. And if you add up the eta, the alpha, the lambda, the eta, theta, epsilon, iota, and alpha, based on the values that I just showed you, the total value is 72. And that's one of our key sacred numbers. Because most of the numbers that I showed you here are multiples of 72, 36 or 72. Katabala, which means conception, the first moment of creation. Kappa, alpha, tau, alpha, beta, omicron, lambda, eta. Take the values, again, directly from the historically authenticated table that I showed you, and they add up to 432. So there you see these numbers showing up here. Yerushalayim, or Jerusalem. Iota, epsilon, rho, omicron, upsilon. This would be the Greek spelling in the New Testament. Sigma, alpha, lambda, eta, and mu. There's the values of the individual letters. Iota, which was 10, epsilon, 5, etc. And when you add those up, you get 864. Again, do we find that number on our list? Yes, we do. These numbers, again, are showing up with redundancy. The Temple of Immortality, Oneos Athanasius. Let's see, I forgot how to pronounce that. Athanasius. Oneos Athanasius. Athanasius, that's it. The Temple of Immortality. So if we take that spelling, add it up, it also is 864. And I'll work on my pronunciations for next time. The Holy Ghost, Toagian Pneuma. Pneuma, like root of our words like pneumatic, means the Holy Ghost or the Holy Spirit. Add up the value of those and you get 1080. The Fountain of Wisdom, Pegasophice, also adds to 1080. So these are just a few examples of, then I heard another great voice from heaven saying, "Come out, my people, out of her, lest you take part in her sins, lest you share in her plagues." A phrase from the book of Revelations, and 1296, which is half of the great year cycle. So I mean, these examples can be multiplied by hundreds, literally by hundreds. And this is actually one of the subdivisions of the study of Kabbalah. which is the Gematria, the study of the numerical or mathematical basis of language. And what you discover when you go into the mathematical basis of language is the whole thing is constructed upon the same architecture of sacred numbers that we've been looking at here for the last hour. Probably you're all familiar with things like, here is wisdom, let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, 666. You ever heard that? Probably the most famous and controversial number out of the Bible, 666. Well, if you want to understand what that is actually referring to, you have to peel back the outer literal representation of these tales and look at the underlying mathematical architecture, because that's where it's concealed. And it actually turns out that the orbital velocity of the Earth around the sun is 66,600 miles per hour, exactly. And that's one of the first astronomical connections, and then there's many, many more connections with that number that we find occurring in sacred geometry. So all of this, there's a lot of silliness and Christian stuff that's accreted to that, the belief in that number, by basically fundamentalists and superstitious people who don't look at the underlying science. But we will take a couple of minutes here and look at a few things. I lifted up, this is from the Old Testament, Zechariah, I lifted up mine eyes again and looked, and behold, a man with a measuring line in his hand. Then said I, whither goest thou? And he said unto me, to measure Jerusalem, to see what is the breadth thereof and what is the length thereof. Old Testament prophet, Zechariah. So here was the beginning of his prophetic experience, his prophetic vision, as he sees this man who's got a measuring line in his hand. And he says he's going to go measure the holy city. And when he does, see, then what's the revelation that follows? The revelation is the sacred geometry that composes, that is the basis of the architecture of the holy city. So the whole revelation is really, it's a geometric revelation. Again, from the book of Revelations, and I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on the Mount of Zion, which to anybody who's versed knows that that's a reference to the sign of Aries, the lamb. And with him 144,000, which is this number right here, having his father's name written in their foreheads. What does that mean? Well, it means that somebody who studies sacred geometry, eventually, you've got these numbers as such an integral part of your consciousness, in your forehead, in your frontal lobe, your waking consciousness, that these numbers literally become a part of the way you experience reality and experience the world, because the numbers are all around us in the world. It gives a shape to the world. It defines the periods of time that governs the cycles of our life. And I heard a voice from heaven as the voice of many waters and as the voice of a great thunder. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. And they sung, as it were, a new song before the throne and before the four beasts. What are the four beasts? The bull, the lion, the eagle, and the man. That divides the cosmic wheel into periods of 6,480 years, which I certainly should add, because that's an important number. So there's a veiled reference to that cycle of time, 6,480. And no man could learn that song but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth. Now, when you get into Kabbalistic studies, you can go to the English translations to lead you into the outer portals. But if you want to get into the inner teaching, you've got to go beyond that. You've got to go back to the original languages. And I'm not going to get too much into that, but the word redeemed is actually a very interesting word. It's talking about the redeemed of the earth, 144,000. We discovered that the word was agorazo, from agora, and it means to go to market. So basically what it's saying is that those who achieve salvation at the day of judgment are those who go out and go shopping. What? Well, isn't that what George Bush told us to do after the, yeah, see? So George Bush, he had his thumb on the pulse of, but actually, see, what's the connection with going to market? Well, as a place, properly the town square, that should be the first clue, the square. See, there's your geometry. As a place of public resort, by implication, a market or thoroughfare. So the idea first is the idea of a square, because the marketplace would be built around a square, a literal square. So it became associated with the idea of people gathering within this square, see? It comes from, well, agorazo comes from, yeah, see here, so to go to market, by implication to purchase, especially to redeem. And it comes from this root, agora, which is related to this, aguero, the idea of collecting one's faculties. This is the idea of collecting within the square again, right? Well, let's think now about, metaphorically, collecting one's faculties, but also to waken or to rouse, literally from sleep, from sitting or lying, from disease or death, or figuratively from obscurity or ruin. It means to awake, to lift up, to raise up, to rear up. So see, all of these ideas are what you're led to once you start going into the original Kabbalistic meanings of the language. So what starts out like go shopping, go to the market, means going to the town square. It means the gathering within this square. So here's the link with your geometry. But then one of the words that we look at when we study the Kabbalistic study of words is we look at the original roots. But then we actually look at how did they bifurcate and how did they lead, because you can follow the evolutionary paths of language to get back to what some of the original meanings actually were, to try to get to what the authors of these sacred writings were really trying to get to. Because you've got to remember that all of these sacred writings have gone through multiple layers of translation by people who may or may not have understood the original doctrines that were concealed in there symbolically and mathematically. Also from the book of Revelation. The reference to the new song is very interesting because, and I would defer later to Jeremy on this, who's been studying the sacred geometry of music, but there is a Phrygian mode of representing the octave that goes from 432 cycles per second to 864 cycles per second. So the reference to singing a new song suggests to me that possibly we're talking about a change in frequency involving life here on Earth, and that those who change their consciousness accordingly will be in harmony with the changing frequencies. And I believe that that is one of the core teachings of this, is that as Earth goes through its evolutionary journey through the galaxy, through varying geometric relationships with the astronomical universe, what is happening is that the frequencies impinging upon the Earth are constantly going through an evolution as well. And part of understanding ancient secrets or methods of the master builders of old was utilizing the sacred geometry and the geodetic knowledge to create structures that resonated with the Earth, because they were harmonically attuned to the Earth. I think that's part of what's going on. Trying to understand the sacred science behind structures like the Parthenon and the Great Pyramid and many of the other temples is this science of harmony, of the science of resonance, and creating structures that vibrated according to certain frequencies, and those frequencies would be attuned to the slowly changing frequencies of the Earth itself as it goes on its cosmic journey through the universe.
All right, so obviously this is some of the most, like I said, this is going to be the stuff that was going to get people the most wound up. Clearly, I exegetically depart from him on many of those things. But I think that the key thing to pull out of this is this part right here. The idea that a main reason why a lot of this knowledge was contained within these different systems, and why it's passed down, and why it's plugged into our language. It's plugged into the language and the math, these different languages we use, the language of words, the language of numbers. These different languages that we use contain a lot of this, because that's where a lot of it came from. These were the people that would be encoding this and passing these things on. Every society is led by its scribes to some extent, and the scribes are the ones who are naturally going to encode this sort of thing. But specifically, the fact that these buildings, these structures were built with an understanding and a knowledge of the relationships of different frequencies, and the fact that the Earth, that there's an electromagnetic phenomenon. There are electromagnetic phenomena that impact the building of structures, and when you build these structures, you can connect with these different frequencies or these different resonances, and these have different effects on us. Like this is really kind of putting a lot of these things in sort of a frou-frou way that is really just kind of the basics of a lot of the way that our architecture and music and everything is done now anyways. And in reality, in a lot of ways, because we've lost much of this and we've treated science and math as these very bland, dead things, rather than being a study of the nature of God and the patterns that are manifest in his creation. As St. Maximus said, all of creation is a theophany. We make shitty architecture now because we don't understand this sort of thing. We absolutely poison ourselves with, you might call it like harmonic toxins or something like that, with the different the way that our relationship to the electromagnetic structure of the world has become so distorted, so disharmonic, you might say, is a major reason why everything seems like it's falling apart. Because it just so happens that when you understand the structure of creation, you can see that beauty and growth and prosperity are not random accidents. There's actually a science to these. There's a math to these things, which you can understand and you can use. And you can use these things. Now, you can choose to use these things for self-glorification. And this is the Promethean myth. That this knowledge, it's not that the knowledge was wrong, it's that the knowledge was offered to people to use selfishly for self-glorification. You can hack your way to God. That's not true. That doesn't mean that these things are not divine. It means that you have to exist in proper relationship to them and recognize that the phenomena themselves are only divine because they're expressions of the one true divine personal God. They're expressions of his character and his nature. And I think I believe personally, you can only truly actually recognize and appreciate the significance and the profundity of this when you're operating from an Orthodox perspective, when you understand the nature of the Trinity, when you understand the nature of not like you can actually understand it, but I think you know what I mean. You understand the relationship of humanity to divinity, what humans were created for. That we were created to understand our relationship to nature and to explore that. And to use that to build and construct things for the glory of God. God gave very detailed descriptions and explanations and blueprints for how his people were to build their structures. And he didn't do, these weren't arbitrary numbers. This wasn't arbitrary construction rules that he just gave them just because he said so. It's because they reflect truths about reality. They reflect truths about creation. And you can take those things and you can try to leverage them into technology to use for the self-glorification of humanity. This is the building of the Tower of Babel. It's not that building towers is wrong. It's that trying to build a tower to ascend to God and leverage yourself there through your own wisdom and might is wrong.
I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and I, John, saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the 864, right? 864, that's the Jerusalem. Coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband. And there came unto me one of the seven angels, saying, Come hither, I will show thee the bride, the Lamb's wife. And he carried me away in the spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. And her light was like unto a stone most precious. And it had a wall great high, and had 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and names written thereon. Now, of course, those names are mathematical keys. On the east 3 gates, on the north 3 gates, on the south 3 gates, and on the west 3 gates. And the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and in them the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And he that talked with me had a golden reed to measure the city. So here again, we have this idea of the measuring of the city, because the city is the repository of the cosmic doctrine. The gates thereof and the wall thereof. And the city lieth 4 square, and the length is as large as the breadth. And he measured the city with the reed 12,000 furlongs. The length and the height of it are equal. And he measured the wall thereof 144 cubits, according to the measure of a man, that is, of the angel. Now I find that verse to be particularly potent in its meaning, because first of all, we have to ask the question, what are we talking about what is the Bible talking about when it refers to angels? Well, you know, the counterpart to angels are found in all cultures. It's just in the Bible they're called angels, who are the messengers, right, from this other domain. But in other cultures, they were usually referred to as the gods. And basically, in the Christianization of the ancient pagan traditions, the gods were replaced by the angels, but their function within the cosmic hierarchy is identical. And so, the fact that the measure of a man, a human, is the same as the measure of the angel is very interesting, because it's saying that we're somehow linked to the gods through a common system of measure. But notice the numbers, 144 cubits. Of course, you got to ask, what is a cubit? And that leads us into some interesting digressions there. Also, the 12,000 furlongs. Well, anybody know how much a furlong is? What is a furlong? Furlongs have almost fallen into disuse. It's a British or English unit of measurement, but it found its way into the King James Bible. It was basically the British counterpart of the Greek stade, which had various lengths, but basically the same length as the furlong. What was the furlong? Where is a furlong used today? Yeah, who goes to the track? Horse racing. A furlong is 660 feet, 1/8 part of a mile. Well, here's what's interesting about the furlong. If you multiply it by 12 to convert it to inches, you discover that the furlong is exactly 7,920 inches. Where did we see that number? This is now a test of your memory. The diameter of the Earth. Remember I said the diameter of the Earth taken through the tropics, the sacred number that's representing the Earth? The furlong is to the inch as the Earth is to a mile. That's a proportion. This is a sacred proportion that was intentionally embodied into the units of measurement. So that we lay out a furlong, right, 660 feet, 1 inch, which is derived from our thumb, the width of our thumb, right there, you can check it out, put your thumb on there and you'll discover it's 1 inch wide, that's the digit. So the thumb is to your foot in this cosmic relationship of 12 to 1. And when you pace, like this is how a pace was generally considered. You start from one point, put your heel against a point, and then every other step you count. 1, 2, 3. 1,000 of those, averaging 5.28 feet, gave us the mile, right? 1,000 times 5.28 is 5,280, and that was the origin of the mile. The mile is literally a mill, 1,000 human paces. The pace, think about the pace, what that is. Our foot, our pace. Our foot is what anchors us to the earth. Our pace is what moves us about the face of the earth, right? The most fundamental relationship we have with the earth, our feet, right? That ratio of pace to foot, 5.28. Now, we have, the furlong is 12,000 of these things, right? 12,000, the holy city is 12,000 of these things, 660 feet. Multiply that out, you discover 7,920,000 feet. So how big is that? Well, divide that by the number of feet in a mile, 5,280, and what you discover is it's precisely 1,500 miles. So what would be 1,500 miles in diameter? Is there some object out there that could be 1,500 miles in diameter? It's certainly described as being something they see in the heavens, right? Well, I'll leave this one an open-ended question for right now, but here's something that's interesting. If we take this number and divide it into, compare it to the Earth, to get a sense of scale. Earth, 7920. Holy City, 1500. So we put 7920 over 1500, and if you quickly do that calculation in your head, you'll discover that 1500 goes into 7920 exactly 5.28 times the relationship of our foot to our pace. So here's a very strange correlation. The earth to the holy city is the same as the pace to the foot. Well, what are they trying to say there? Well, one of the implications of this, it follows from this truth. The truth is that we humans are ultimately designed according to the cosmic measure. We were created in the image of God, right? And God is the ultimate cosmic measure. And we, being created in the image of God, embody the cosmic measures. So when Protagoras said man is the measure of all things, what he was implying is that we are the ultimate yardstick for the cosmos. In fact, when one looks at the scale of phenomena, from the human up to the largest macro scale that we know of, and from the human down to the smallest micro scale we know of, where are we within that hierarchy? Right smack in the middle. So there's as much above us as there is below us. There's as much greater than us as there is lesser than us. And I think that's one of the implications of this, is that when we begin looking at our sacred geometry, we realize it's the ultimate fusion of all of these phenomena on all scales, and the ultimate component, or the ultimate symbol of all that fusion is we ourselves. And then, of course, ultimately it's our consciousness, because, like I said, with his name written in our forehead, what that means is that when you study sacred geometry, you're literally building an edifice in your consciousness. You're building a form out of your own, the material of your own conscious mind that reflects this order of nature, of cosmic nature that's all about us. And that's the power, and why study of sacred geometry can ultimately be a key to accessing lots of other things like the Kabbalah and the alchemy and the Hermetic wisdom and the Gnostic traditions and the traditions of the Vedas and so forth. There it is, 12,000 furlongs. The city lieth four square, 48,000 furlongs on a perimeter. It's also described as cubical. 12,000 furlongs equals 7,920,000 feet.
So real quick, addressing that. See, my takeaway from that, the point I think is well made, that us as the cosmic measure, and there you could think of this in the sense of you can zoom out exponentially far, or you can zoom in exponentially far, and it seems as if everything in the universe is being portrayed from the perspective of humanity. And perhaps that might be because the Logos, the divine Logos, is human. The Logos of reality is human. Not just generically human, it's a specific person. You can know this person. You can talk to him. You can meet him. You can engage with him. You can interact with him. He's a real person. And what he's identifying here, he's seeing through a glass darkly. He's like, there's something really significant about humans. We aren't just some sort of, so what's the default? The default settings are, human, we're just a random assortment of organic matter that has a higher level of intelligence. And what he is identifying is that's not true. There's something special about humans. The thing that's special about humans is that we are made in the image of God. And not just that, but God actually took on our particular version of his image that he created. So the fact that the universe reflects humanity back to itself is not because of whatever Freemasonry reason he wants to give. It's because this is specifically the truth that is presented by Orthodox Christianity, that man is made in the image of God and that the divine Logos is human. So of course man is the cosmic measure, because reality was not made for it wasn't made for the dogs and the horses and the grass and all these things were made for man. These things were made for us. They're our responsibility to care for, because we are reflected in it and it is reflected in us. So exercising dominion over the earth is recognizing man's cosmic role with respect to the universe, which is a major reason why I have such a hard time with the globe model and the idea that it's just this little spinning rock out in the middle of nowhere in this gigantic, vast universe, and we're just completely insignificant, yada, yada, yada. No. The earth is the center of the universe, because the earth is where mankind resides. And the universe was created for mankind. The earth was created for God through mankind. And in the person of Jesus Christ was humanity and divinity permanently linked. So as we get to know Christ, as we grow near to Christ, we become more like him because he's not just God, he's also the perfect human. The perfect human is God. So when we're studying these things, these are not like Natashki says, this is like getting the cheat codes to a video game. No. That's the way he's presenting it. And I'm saying he's wrong. This isn't getting the cheat codes to the video game. If you're looking at this, that's the Promethean exercise. Oh, we can get the cheat codes. We can hack reality. And if we hack reality, we'll outsmart God and we'll use our magical wiles against him and we'll ascend to his level on our own terms. But that doesn't mean that the information he's presenting is wrong. In fact, it's the other way around. The information he's presenting is actually reinforcing the Orthodox perspective, the Christian. I'll be a little more ecumenical here, and I'll say the Christian perspective because I know that all of the audience here isn't. You're not all Orthodox. He's saying we are all little gods. In a sense, we are. God became man so that man might become God. Saint Athanasius. This is the purpose for the creation of humanity. The purpose for the creation of humanity is to participate in the life of the Trinity, so that our human nature is divinized through that participation. This is the human will. This is our will to our whatever gay word we use today, destiny or like making the most of ourselves or however it gets framed. Like this is what it means. To have a free will is to be free to become that which we were created to be. To become ever more perfectly human through our union with the divine.
Equals 1,500 miles. The total perimeter, 31,680. That has a profound mystical significance, which we will save for another time. So there it is, a tabulation of some of the stuff we've covered. The diameter of the Earth is 7920. 1 furlong, 7920 inches. The diameter of the New Jerusalem, 7,920,000 feet, which is 1,500 miles. 1 mile is 5,280 feet, or 1,000 paces of 5.28 feet. 1.5 miles is 7,920 feet. And here's the pace to the foot, equals the Earth to the Holy City, which equals 7,920 to 1,500, and there's that magic ratio of 5.28 that links the Earth to this other cosmic entity, for now going unnamed, that relates to our own scale exactly as our pace does to our foot. And what you discover is that if you're taller or shorter, it doesn't matter, because it's a proportional relationship. If you're taller, your pace, my pace is in excess of 6 feet. So 5.28, you're going to have a somewhat shorter, but you're going to discover that the ratio is relatively constant. Because as you get taller, presumably your feet get bigger, with some exceptions, right? I know some little people with really big feet. And here is the Hebrew cubit, which is 18 inches. Remember, 144 cubits according to the measure of a man, that is of the angel. We have the Egyptian royal cubit of 1.727 feet. The wall of the city was 144 cubits. If we take the 144 cubits that are the Hebrew cubits, it's 216 feet, or 2,592 inches. Add 1 0 on the end of that, and we have the great year cycle, 25,920 years. If we express it instead in Egyptian cubits, which may have been the original intent, if not implying that either cubit was legitimate, 144 Egyptian royal cubits of 144 times 1.727 is 248.814. Move the decimal over 2 points, you got 24,881.4. Call that miles, and there's the circumference of the Earth, 24,881 miles. So there's all kinds of information embedded in here, but you've got to have the key to begin to unlock it. Okay, and then also notice that the moon, 2,160 miles, or 17,280 furlongs, if we set the diameter of the moon to the diameter of the holy city, there's our 1.44 ratio. So what we have here is this redundancy over and over again. You have the same numbers recurring over and over again in the measure of time and space, both in absolute dimensions, but also in the proportional relationships that result from comparing these various entities of time and space. As we've learned now, the diameter of the moon is 2160 miles, the diameter of the sun is 864,000. As it turns out, if you take the diameter of the sun and multiply it by this number right here, it gives us the distance between the Earth and the sun. And if we take the diameter of the moon, which is 2160, multiply it by the same factor of 108, we discover that we now have the Earth-Moon distance. So it's this 108 factor, this 108 spacing, this proportional relationship. We could express it this way. Solar distance to solar diameter equal lunar distance to lunar diameter, and the value of that proportion is the sacred number 108, as we see embodied right here in Baheng.
One thing that, speaking of the idea of the standard globe model with the super far away sun and moon versus the I guess flat Earth model with the local sun and moon, the fact that there's a ratio representation here is one of the clues to me that this is they're viewing through a glass darkly, so they're seeing something and they're measuring something, and they're seeing this relationship between these things, and their scale relationship is off. It actually, sonoluminescence is another really interesting subject to dig into, and I need to do a little more studying to understand it myself. But I find it very compelling. When it comes down to it, frequencies and ratios and pressure differentials and electromagnetic phenomena, like all of this is all, you're studying all the same stuff, and it's like we're triangulating in on something. So yeah, again, I that's an area where it's kind of like I see like a little chink in the armor where you could say, okay, so there's this relationship here, because what we're identifying is that there's a proportional relationship, and then we're plugging in these numbers that to fit with this like vastly more scaled up model, but that proportional relationship could still fit on a scaled down model.
Of Cambodia from the 12th century with its 108 towers. And there are many examples of how these numbers were incorporated into the fabric of sacred architecture. That there has been some kind of a universal system at use in the ancient world. And these various cultural groups, whether it was the Egyptians or Sumerians or Mayans or the Hopewellians or the megalithic builders, had access to some universal system from some source that was outside their own cultural context. And I suggest that the source of that goes back into deep time, that takes us back beyond the threshold of known history into the realm of mythical history, which means we're going back like into the Ice Age, back into the Pleistocene, to use the geologist term, back into the deep recesses of the human tenure on planet Earth, whose only memory has come down to us not in the form of recorded history, but in the form of myth and epic story and legend and so forth. Because as it turns out, and this again is a good topic for the sacred geometry class, when we analyze Plato's description of Atlantis, Plato basically gave the date of the sinking of Atlantis as 9,000 years prior to Solon, the Egyptian, the Athenian poet and statesman. Solon did a 10-year exile in Egypt, and it was Solon that brought back the tale of Atlantis and presented it to the Greeks. And Solon basically made that journey around 600 BC. So if you add the 9,000 years to the 600 BC, we come up with a date of about 11,600 years ago for Plato's date for the demise of Atlantis. Well, it's very interesting that the date 11,600 years has been independently discovered by geologists looking at the tempo of various catastrophes that have occurred on Earth. And to those catastrophes is where I'm now going to turn. Catastrophes in the time of man, the tempo of global change. What I've done here is I put a time bar that goes from the present, right here. This is us now. This is today. Right here is May 3rd at 4 o'clock. Is it 4 o'clock? That's right here. And this is 150,000 years ago. And the reason I used 150,000 years is that some of the earliest skeletal remains ever discovered of modern humans date back to 150 to even to 180,000 years. Skeletons that appear to be indistinguishable from a modern skeleton, which suggests that modern humans with presumably equivalent intelligence to our own were present on the planet at least this far back. So here we've got a 150,000 year time span. You'll notice this little red bar at the end. That red bar represents the span of recorded history, which is basically the advent of Sumerian cuneiform writing. So if it turns out that there were modern humans living through this whole span of time, why is there no history? Well, now you got to do is turn to these various things that I've put on here. These are events that occurred. And I used a certain criteria for these events. And here's the criteria I used. I began studying the record of geological change, climate change, environmental change, and I focused on events that could be considered catastrophic. And catastrophic to the extent that were an event of an equivalent magnitude to occur now, it would basically end civilization as we know it. That's the criteria I used. What would be the magnitude of an event that it would take to terminate our modern industrial civilization? That's the criteria that I used. Then I began to search through the record of all of the events that would be of that magnitude or greater. And the events that I found so far have been entered onto this graph, and they're listed all here. You can see them. And how many do we have here? and this is not complete necessarily, but we have at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 of them in 150,000 years. So at least 16 times in the last 150,000 years, there have been climate or environmental or geological catastrophes powerful enough that were they to occur today would essentially put us back into the Stone Age. Would essentially, if you think about some of the small catastrophes we have seen in the last few years, from the destruction of New Orleans to the great tsunami, to some of the big earthquakes that we've seen, New Orleans is still not recovered. But you've got to imagine what would happen if an event that was 1 order of magnitude greater than Katrina happened. By that I mean 10 times worse. Let's say that we had 10 cities decimated to the extent of New Orleans. We could certainly recover from that, but it would be a major effort to do so. Now what if we were talking about 2 orders of magnitude? Let's say, to put it into a rough equivalency, an event that could cause the decimation of 100 major urban areas. Could we recover from that? Questionable. Now let's go 3 orders of magnitude. And now we're talking about the equivalent of 1,000 major cities completely decimated. Okay, at that level, 3 orders of magnitude, that's what these are. Those are events that essentially would be 3 orders of magnitude. Once you begin to ponder this, it becomes apparent why there isn't a record, an extant record of what's been going on for the whole time that we humans have been here. Now, at this point, you probably haven't tied this in with what we've been saying before, other than I'll point out a few things to you that should be onset of the late Wisconsin Ice Age, 26,000 years before present. Remember the great year in the processional cycle? Add about 80 years to that, we've got 26,000. Of course, 26,000 you can figure plus or minus a few centuries. Now, you come through that cosmic clock that I showed you, right? Halfway to the cusp of the age of Leo. 12,900 years ago, roughly. And what happened? We have something that happened 12,900 years before present, onset of the Younger Dryas climate catastrophe, first phase of the megafaunal extinction. Now here what I've done is I've entered some green dots. Now look at what the green dots are. The green dots are basically derived directly from the model of the Great Year, based upon cycles of 6,480, 12,960, and then 25,920. And you'll notice how high of a correlation there is between the tempo of events, the actual events that have been derived by scientists without any reference to this Great Year model at all, and the timing of these ages of the world. Remember the 6,480 years, that was the bull, the lion, the eagle, and the man. And according to the traditions, each of those seasons of the Great Year is inaugurated by some type of a great event, a transformative event, a catastrophe, if you will. And what I've done here is I have developed a data set that shows the correlation. It certainly seems from a study of this graph that these intervals, these event nodes as I call them, the susceptibility of something happening goes up exponentially for a short period of time. Here's the analogy that I have used. You're out driving along a quiet country road, you've got it on cruise control, you're kicking back, you're listening to some tunes, you're not paying much attention, you're talking on your cell phone, not much traffic. Okay, now you come up to a major highway, and cars are like this. Well, you're crossing that intersection, and while you're crossing that intersection, now suddenly you got to put your cell phone down and start paying attention, because if you don't, you're going to get T-boned, right? Well, obviously, you've got your whole journey, and each time you cross an intersection of a major highway, the potential of a catastrophe increases considerably over what it would be while you're out there on the lonely country road. Well, you see, our planet is on a cosmic highway around the galaxy, and we're now beginning to understand the fine structure of the galaxy, and we realize that there is a pattern and an order to it. And there's a tempo of these orbital revolutions. There's a tempo of the galaxy, and there's a wave pattern of the Earth moving up and down, above and below the galactic plane. And within that, there are suborbital cycles as well. And we also discovered that there seems to be a tempo in the delivery of cosmic matter to the inner solar system. It doesn't seem to be random.
It blows my mind that they actually have, they've been able to go out and go into the middle of an asteroid field like this and film. I don't know how they keep the cameras from getting destroyed. It's just amazing.
And this is going to be beyond the scope of today's lecture, but what I'm getting at here is that the evidence now supports the conclusion that the delivery of cosmic material and energy, the energy pulses that would be affecting Earth, are non-random, that they're on some kind of a cosmic timetable, cosmic tempo, if you will. And I think this is one of the most important insights we get from these ancient traditions, is the measurement of cosmic time and how it relates to us here on Earth. You just got to know what to look for and where to look for it. Once you begin to become aware of it and you begin to see it, you begin to realize that the cosmic fingerprints are everywhere about us. We're in fact living in and upon the wreckage of the former worlds. The rubble of these former worlds is all around us, but we haven't had the scale of perspective to see it. And that's where we're at now. I'm completely thrilled with things like the emergence of Google Earth, because Google Earth is now allowing us to all of us to sit at our computers and see the cosmic perspective of Earth. And when you look at it from from the extraterrestrial point of view, things begin to show up that we don't see when we're right down here immersed on it so close that we're like ants walking on the rubble and can't see what's around us. But we do see that we literally have built our own world and our own social system on top of and out of the wreckage of former worlds.
All right. Well, we made it. And yes, that was a joke. I don't actually think that that's camera footage from inside an asteroid field. So that was video number 1. That kind of sets the baseline, provides a little bit of context. And there's more that we're going to get into on future episodes, digging in more to stuff related specifically to the pyramids, and then some stuff to the catastrophe cycles, and then stuff related to technology that's being developed based on what people have understood from the construction of the pyramids. That has some very interesting implications for us. So thank you for bearing along with me, guys. Here, we're almost at the 3-hour mark. Somehow we've gone from doing 1.5-hour shows to doing 2-hour shows to doing 3-hour shows, and hopefully you guys are enjoying it. I go crazy about this stuff. I think it's a lot of fun, and it's like if I'd have been able to learn history and math and science and geometry and all this stuff in school like this, I was a pretty good student as it was, and I always enjoyed it. I would have naturally enjoyed staying in academia and working in academia when I was younger. But if it had been taught to me this way, I would have been a lot more interested in it. So I appreciate you guys hanging out here. Once again, you can join the Kingpill Discord, kingpill.com, and we talk about this stuff. We talk about a whole bunch of different stuff in there, business. We talk about politics and religion, and we have a great meme thread where we shit post and post good memes. And it's a really good group of people. We've got about 100 people in there now. So we'd love to have you come join us. And do me a favor right now. It says we've got 45 viewers. We've held the viewership up pretty well. I expected it would start falling off pretty hard as we got deeper into the math and the schizo and everything. But you guys have stuck it out. I appreciate you. We've got 32 likes, so 44 viewers and 32 likes. So a few of you still need to hit that like button on your way out. Thank you for helping us keep the channel alive and be able to keep doing these shows for you guys. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. We also have all of this on all your podcasts. I understand. I've had a few people reach out and say that the podcasts have not been uploaded recently. We've got that sorted, and they should be getting uploaded here again soon. So if that's the way you prefer to listen, then you can get us at all your major podcatchers. I haven't said this in a while. If you're on Apple Podcasts, you're not going to see the Kingpill branding. It's going to look different. It's our old image, and I haven't been able to get it updated, and I don't care anymore. So that's still us. It's still the same show. Just look up Kingpill. There's nothing else named Kingpill thus far. Natashki says it's like he takes true stuff and spins it. Correct. Yeah, he does. I don't think he is malevolently spinning it. If you've listened to Randall Carlson for any length of time, you understand he's a very, very sincere, honest, good-souled man. But my goal is to take the stuff that he's spinning and spin it back the right way. To whatever extent I can. And I'm not smart enough to do that with most of it, but hopefully I can push it out in front of other people who see the world more like I do, and maybe their minds can latch onto it and they could do something with it. Because I think that there's a lot of work that we could be doing that would be easier to do if we had the advantage of understanding the nature of reality better than the people who stand in our way. So I'm hoping to get this in front of somebody who can take it and run with it. And if nothing else, maybe you just found it interesting, and you can join the Kingpill Discord and we can talk about this stuff further. Anyways, I got to go do prayers now. I don't know if you guys saw it. The little man was in here running around with his toy vacuum, and I had to try to keep him away from all the cables and lights and everything. So thank you guys for showing up. You're good, Natashki. It's all good. I'm glad you stuck it out. I'm glad you hung around. I hope you keep coming back. We will talk to you guys